London forgave many sins among its aristocracy. Weakness was never one of them. Snow drifted silently beyond the tall windows of Ravenshire Manor, while the first pale light of dawn spread across the frost-covered grounds like silver poured over glass. Inside the Duchess's chambers, the world remained warm beneath layers of velvet curtains, glowing embers, and candlelight softened by the hush of early morning. Seraphina Ravenshire opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she did not move. The silence felt unfamiliar now. Not lonely silence. Not the brittle silence she had known during girlhood while her father gambled away the future of their family downstairs. This silence breathed beside her. Warm, steady, alive. Lucien's arm rested loosely around her waist beneath the heavy blankets. Even asleep, the Duke of Ravenshire held her as though some hidden instinct refused to release her entirely. The realization still startled her sometimes. 6 months ago, all of London had whispered that Lucien Ravenshire could never desire a woman. Now the most feared duke in England slept with his face turned toward her pillow as though she had become the safest place in his world. Snow light slipped through the narrow opening between the curtains, illuminating the sharp lines of his face. Sleep softened him only slightly. The severe angle of his jaw remained. The faint silver threaded near his temples still caught the light like frost against dark stone. Yet there was something dangerously intimate about seeing a man like Lucien unaware of his own defenses. His hand tightened once against her waist. "You're staring again," he murmured without opening his eyes. Seraphina felt warmth rise faintly beneath her skin. "You were asleep. I was attempting sleep." His voice remained rough with exhaustion. "You make it difficult when you breathe like you're planning an escape." A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Lucien finally opened his eyes. Gray, calm, terrifyingly observant, even half awake. He studied her face in silence for several seconds, and Seraphina recognized the look immediately. He was checking for shadows beneath her eyes, for tension around her mouth, for any sign that the nightmares from the previous season had returned. It unsettled her still, how carefully he noticed everything now. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Nothing." His thumb brushed once against the fabric covering her hip. "You smiled in your sleep." The answer arrived so simply that something low in her chest tightened unexpectedly. Lucien Ravenshire was not a man given to careless tenderness. Every soft thing he offered felt dangerous precisely because he never offered it lightly. Outside the chamber doors, the distant sound of servants beginning the morning drifted faintly through the manor. Footsteps, fire grates opening, the muted clatter of silver trays somewhere below stairs. Ravenshire Manor always awakened slowly in winter. The ancient estate seemed to breathe with the season itself. Seraphina shifted carefully against the pillows. "If Mrs. Whitmore discovers the Duke of Ravenshire still in bed past 8 o'clock, I fear the household may collapse from shock." Lucien's expression remained perfectly serious. "Then we should preserve the staff from unnecessary suffering." "How noble of you! I am known for my generosity." That nearly made her laugh again. Nearly. Lucien's gaze lingered on her mouth for half a second longer than necessary. Then his expression changed. Subtly. The warmth remained, but something more guarded settled beneath it. Seraphina had learned to recognize those shifts now. His mind never truly rested. Not even here. Not even with her. She touched his wrist lightly. "You did not sleep much." "I slept enough." "Lucien." He exhaled quietly through his nose. Not irritation. Resignation. "There was correspondence from Parliament after midnight." "And you answered it?" "Some of England's ministers continue making unfortunate decisions despite my best efforts." She studied him for another moment. The candlelight revealed faint shadows beneath his eyes. "You returned to bed before dawn. You noticed. You carry winter air into every room you enter." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. That almost smile affected her more than grand declarations ever could. Because Lucien never smiled for society. Never for politics. Never for performance. Only here. Only with her. A knock sounded softly at the outer sitting room door. Both of them looked toward it immediately. Lucien's expression cooled at once with practiced instinct. "Enter," he said. The maid who stepped carefully into the chamber lowered her eyes at once. "Good morning, Your Grace. Breakfast has been prepared in the blue drawing room." "Thank you, Clara," Seraphina replied gently. "And Mrs. Whitmore asked me to remind Your Grace that the physician arrives before noon regarding the estate workers in the North Village." Lucien nodded once. "Very good." The maid hesitated, just briefly. Then her eyes flickered upward before she could stop herself. Surprise crossed her face so quickly another person might have missed it entirely. Seraphina did not miss it. Neither did Lucien. The young maid lowered her gaze instantly and hurried from the room. Silence followed after the door shut. Seraphina leaned back slightly against the pillows. She looked frightened. She looked curious. "That is worse." Lucien's gaze slid toward the door. "The servants still expect me to bite someone before breakfast." "Do you?" "Only politicians." That earned him a proper smile this time. Lucien watched it with quiet intensity that made her heartbeat stumble unexpectedly even now. Then his hand lifted. His knuckles brushed softly against the curve of her cheek. "There it is," he murmured. "What?" "The expression you wore before London taught you caution." Her breath caught slightly. The room suddenly felt too still, too warm. Lucien rarely spoke about the past directly. When he did, every word landed with frightening precision. Seraphina looked away first. "You give me too much credit." "No," his voice deepened quietly. "I give London too little." She felt his fingers slip gently beneath her chin until she looked back at him. "You survived them," he said. "That was never weakness." Something fragile moved through her chest before she could protect herself from it. Lucien saw that too. Of course he did. He saw everything now, which was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. Half an hour later, the blue drawing room glowed with winter light reflected against polished marble floors and pale silk wallpaper. A fire crackled steadily beneath the carved white mantel while breakfast waited untouched across the long mahogany table. Silver coffee service. Fresh bread. Preserves imported from France. Soft-boiled eggs kept warm beneath polished covers. Yet despite the luxury surrounding them, the room felt strangely intimate this morning. Perhaps because Lucien sat beside her rather than across from her as he once would have done. Perhaps because his hand rested absent-mindedly against the back of her chair while he reviewed correspondence. Or perhaps because the Duke of Ravenshire no longer looked at his wife like a stranger trapped beside him by obligation. He looked at her like a man still learning what peace cost. "Westmore is attempting to challenge the shipping proposal again," Lucien said without glancing up from the letter in his hand. "I thought you already destroyed his argument in Parliament." "I did." He reached for his coffee calmly. "Unfortunately, stupidity often survives humiliation." Seraphina hid her smile behind her teacup. "You are remarkably charitable this morning. Marriage has softened me beyond recognition." The butler entered quietly carrying another tray of correspondence. "Additional letters from London, Your Grace." Lucien accepted them with visible reluctance. Seraphina watched him for a moment longer before reaching for a piece of toast. The scent of butter suddenly turned strange halfway to her mouth. Her stomach shifted sharply. Heat climbed unexpectedly into her throat. She lowered the toast immediately. Lucien noticed at once. Of course he did. "What is it?" "Nothing." She reached for tea instead. The scent hit her harder this time. A sudden wave of dizziness swept through her so unexpectedly that her fingers tightened against the edge of the tablecloth. Lucien was already turning toward her fully. "Seraphina, I am quite all right." The lie sounded weak even to her own ears. The room tilted faintly for one disorienting second. Lucien stood immediately. The movement startled even the servants near the walls. "Sit down," he said quietly. Not cold, not commanding. Worse, concerned. Genuine concern from Lucien Ravenshire always carried the weight of an approaching storm. "Your Grace," the butler began cautiously. "Shall I send for Dr. Pembroke?" Lucien did not take his eyes off Seraphina. "Immediately." "Lucien," It is unnecessary. You nearly fainted. I did not faint. You were deciding whether to. The answer arrived so calmly that argument became impossible. Seraphina exhaled softly and allowed him to guide her back against the chair. His hand remained steady against her spine for half a second longer than propriety required. Not because servants stood nearby, because he was reluctant to let go. That realization unsettled her more than the dizziness itself. Lucien crouched slightly beside her chair despite the watching staff. A duke lowering himself beside anyone would have shocked London society enough. Lucien Ravenshire doing so for tenderness alone would have silenced Parliament. His voice dropped lower. Tell me exactly what you feel. You sound like an interrogator. I am one. That explains the terrible bedside manner. A flicker of impatience crossed his face. Not with her. With fear. She saw it then. Briefly. The thing he tried so carefully to hide from the world. Terror. Not of politics. Not of enemies. Of losing something he could no longer survive without. His thumb brushed once against the inside of her wrist where her pulse fluttered too quickly. Seraphina. The softness in her name nearly undid her. She looked at him carefully then. At the man all of London once believed incapable of loving anyone. The man who now looked at her as though her heartbeat governed his own. Outside the manor windows, snow continued falling across the vast Ravenshire grounds. Quiet, beautiful, merciless, and somewhere deep inside her body, hidden beneath warmth and dizziness and the strange trembling now moving through her veins, something had already begun to change. Neither of them knew yet that by nightfall, all of London would begin hunting that secret. Dr. Pembroke arrived at Ravenshire Manor shortly before noon beneath a sky the color of iron. Snow covered the carriage path in a thin white layer that muffled the sound of wheels against stone. While footmen hurried forward through the cold to open the physician's carriage door before the older man could protest the assistance. Inside the manor, the atmosphere had shifted almost imperceptibly since breakfast. The servants moved more quietly. Fires were stoked more often. Even the grand corridors of Ravenshire seemed to hold their breath beneath the weight of the Duke's attention fixed entirely upon one room. Seraphina sat near the drawing-room fireplace wrapped in a pale blue shawl while Dr. Pembroke arranged his instruments across the small table beside her chair. The physician had served aristocratic families for nearly 30 years. He had attended royal births, hidden scandals, political collapses, and enough discreet affairs to destroy half the House of Lords if he ever chose honesty over survival. Yet even he appeared faintly uneasy beneath Lucien Ravenshire's silent gaze. The Duke stood near the tall windows with one hand behind his back while snow drifted beyond the glass in slow, restless spirals. He had not touched the untouched stack of parliamentary letters waiting beside him for the past hour. That alone would have shocked London more than any scandal. Dr. Pembroke cleared his throat gently. "Your Grace," he began carefully while taking Seraphina's pulse. "Have you experienced dizziness often?" "Only this morning." "Nausea?" Seraphina hesitated slightly. "A little." Lucien's eyes lifted instantly from the windows. Dr. Pembroke noticed the movement and wisely kept his attention on the Duchess instead. "Fatigue?" "Not unusually." The physician nodded slowly while considering her complexion. Seraphina remained composed outwardly, though her fingers tightened faintly around the edge of the shawl across her lap. She disliked physicians, not because of fear, because examinations always carried a humiliating vulnerability she had spent most of her life avoiding. Dr. Pembroke stepped back after several more quiet questions. The room fell still. Even the fire seemed softer suddenly. Lucien finally spoke. "Well?" The physician glanced once toward Seraphina before answering. "Your Grace." A faint smile touched the older man's mouth. "There is no cause for alarm." Lucien did not move. "Explain." "The Duchess is perfectly healthy." Another pause followed. Small. Deliberate. "And unless I am greatly mistaken." Dr. Pembroke folded his spectacles carefully into his coat pocket. "Her Grace is expecting a child." Silence consumed the room entirely. Seraphina felt the words arrive almost without meaning at first. as though they belonged to another woman sitting somewhere far away beside another fire in another life. Expecting a child. The phrase echoed softly through her chest before reality finally caught up with it. Her breath caught. Instinctively, her hand drifted lower against her abdomen beneath the folds of her gown. Lucien said nothing. That frightened her more than any reaction could have. Dr. Pembroke glanced carefully between them. It is still early, of course. A few months, perhaps. But I feel quite confident in my assessment. Still Lucien remained silent. Seraphina slowly lifted her eyes toward him. He had not changed position beside the windows. Yet something in the room itself felt different now. He looked almost unnaturally still, controlled beyond ordinary restraint. The physician cleared his throat again. With proper rest, reduced stress, and careful monitoring, I expect the pregnancy shall proceed normally. Lucien finally moved. One step, then another across the drawing room floor. His expression revealed nothing. Absolutely nothing. But Seraphina noticed his hands. They remained loosely clasped behind his back with too much precision. Too much discipline. She knew him well enough now to recognize what others never would. Lucien Ravenshire only became this controlled when emotion threatened to overwhelm him completely. "Leave us," he said quietly. Dr. Pembroke blinked once. "Your Grace, you will remain at Ravenshire Manor for the remainder of the week." Lucien's voice stayed calm. "You will speak of this to no one. Not your servants. Not your wife. Not your colleagues in London. Am I understood?" The physician straightened immediately. "Perfectly, Your Grace." "Good." Lucien reached into his coat pocket and removed several folded banknotes without looking at them. "If I discover this conversation repeated elsewhere, no amount of money in England will protect the person responsible." Dr. Pembroke accepted the payment with visible caution. "Discretion has always been my profession, Your Grace." "Then continue practicing it." A few moments later, the physician disappeared into the corridor escorted by the butler, while the drawing-room doors shut softly behind him. Silence returned at once. Seraphina remained seated near the fire, still struggling to fully absorb the reality unfolding around her. A child. Lucien's child. The future heir of Ravenshire. Her pulse fluttered unevenly beneath her skin. Slowly, she looked toward her husband. He had not returned to the windows. He stood motionless several feet away from her chair, staring not at her face but at the hand resting unconsciously against her stomach. Seraphina had never seen him look uncertain before. Not in Parliament. Not during scandals. Not while facing entire ballrooms filled with enemies pretending to smile. Yet now uncertainty moved quietly across his features like a shadow passing over stone. "Lucien." He lifted his eyes immediately. The intensity there startled her. "Say something," she whispered. His jaw tightened once. "I am thinking." "That sounds ominous." "It is." The answer arrived too quickly. Seraphina studied him carefully. "You are unhappy." "No," he crossed the remaining distance toward her chair. "God, no." Relief flickered briefly through her chest before vanishing beneath the expression in his eyes. Fear. Not rejection. Fear. Real fear. Lucien lowered himself slowly onto the chair opposite hers. His gaze never left her face. "Do you understand what this means?" "It means we are having a child. It means," he said quietly, "that every family in London with reason to hate me now has a target." The warmth in the room seemed to dim slightly. Seraphina watched him in silence while the fire crackled softly between them. "Lucien, I should have anticipated this." "Anticipated our child?" His expression shifted sharply. "Do not say it like that." "Like what?" "As though this is unfortunate." His voice lowered further. "It is not unfortunate." Something inside her softened instantly at the strain hidden beneath those words. Lucien leaned forward slightly, forearms resting against his knees. "You know what they say about me. I stopped caring what London says months ago. London did not stop caring." His eyes darkened. "They spent years convincing themselves I could never love a woman, that I could never desire one." He looked toward the fire briefly before continuing. Now you are carrying my heir. Understanding settled slowly through her chest. Not joy alone. Danger. Political danger. Social danger. The kind aristocratic society wrapped in silk and smiles before quietly destroying lives behind ballroom doors. Seraphina exhaled carefully. They will gossip. They will investigate. Lucien's answer arrived coldly. They will question dates, appearances, rumors, bloodlines. His expression hardened further. And if they cannot destroy me through Parliament, they will attempt it through you. The words settled heavily between them. Outside, snow struck softly against the windows in restless patterns. Seraphina looked down toward her hands for several seconds before speaking again. Are you afraid? Lucien did not answer immediately. He simply watched her with that terrible, unwavering focus only he possessed. Then at last he said quietly, terrified. The honesty in the word stole her breath more effectively than any declaration of love ever could. Lucien Ravenshire feared almost nothing in this world. Men feared him. Ministers feared him. Entire political alliances collapsed under the weight of his attention. Yet now fear moved openly through his voice because of her. Because of the child neither of them had expected to exist so soon. Seraphina rose slowly from her chair and crossed the small distance separating them. Lucien stood instantly the moment she approached him. His hands hovered briefly near her waist as though uncertain whether he was permitted to touch her. That hesitation alone revealed more about his emotional state than anger ever would have. She reached for his hand first. Lucien. His fingers closed tightly around hers at once. Look at me. He obeyed immediately. This child is not a weakness. Pain flickered across his face so briefly another person might never have seen it. Everything I love becomes a weakness eventually. The confession landed low in her chest with startling force. Seraphina stepped closer without breaking his gaze. Then perhaps you should stop loving things halfway. Something shifted in his expression then. Not calm. Not relief. Something deeper. More dangerous. He lifted her hand slowly toward his mouth and pressed a soft kiss against her knuckles without looking away from her eyes. You do not understand, he said quietly. I have already failed at that. Her heartbeat stumbled hard enough she could feel it in her throat. Lucien's hand moved carefully toward her waist. Then lower. Slow enough to allow her time to pull away if she wished. She did not. His palm rested lightly against the fabric covering her stomach. The touch looked almost reverent. He closed his eyes briefly. One breath. Two. When he opened them again, the uncertainty had vanished. The Duke of Ravenshire returned in its place. Cold. Controlled. Ruthless when necessary. But now something else existed beneath that power. Something infinitely more dangerous. Devotion. Lucien stepped back abruptly and crossed the room toward the doors. Where are you going? To secure the manor. Lucien. He stopped without turning fully around. No one learns of this, he said quietly. Not yet. We cannot hide it forever. Forever is unnecessary. He looked toward her over his shoulder. Gray eyes. Winter eyes. Merciless now. I only need enough time to discover which enemies intend to come for you first. Then he opened the drawing room doors and issued the first order that would quietly place all of Ravenshire Manor under lockdown before nightfall. 3 days passed beneath heavy winter skies while Ravenshire Manor transformed quietly into the most carefully guarded estate in England. Footmen doubled along the outer corridors. Unknown servants disappeared without explanation. Visitors were turned away at the gates with polite efficiency that concealed something far sharper beneath it. Even the household staff lowered their voices whenever the Duke crossed a room. Seraphina noticed all of it. Lucien had not exaggerated his fear. He had weaponized it. The fourth morning arrived wrapped in thick silver fog that swallowed the estate grounds almost entirely from view. Seraphina stood near the library windows with one hand resting lightly against the cold glass while candlelight flickered softly behind her. The library had become Lucien's preferred refuge during the past several days because it allowed him to work without placing more than a few feet between himself and his wife. Parliamentary documents covered the massive oak desk near the fireplace. Letters from ministers, shipping reports, political correspondence sealed with royal insignias. Yet Lucien barely touched any of them anymore. Every few minutes his eyes lifted automatically toward Seraphina as though verifying she still existed within sight. She felt those glances even without turning around. "You are staring again," she said quietly. Behind her, the scratch of Lucien's pen stopped immediately. "You continue remaining visible. It encourages the behavior." Seraphina turned slowly from the windows. "I begin to suspect the Duke of Ravenshire has become unreasonable." "Begin." A faint shadow of amusement touched his expression before fading almost instantly beneath exhaustion. He had slept little since learning of the pregnancy. She knew because she often woke during the night to find his side of the bed empty and the distant glow of library candles beneath the door connecting their chambers. Lucien reached for another unopened letter without enthusiasm. "Westbridge is requesting my attendance at dinner next Thursday. And I declined. Again. I fail to understand why London insists upon gathering in large rooms simply to lie politely to one another." Seraphina crossed slowly toward the fire. "You attended such gatherings before." "Before," he said quietly. "I had reasons to tolerate risk." The answer settled heavily between them. Lucien broke the seal on the next letter with visible irritation. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Seraphina's heartbeat to tighten. "What is it?" He read several lines in silence before folding the paper carefully. Too carefully. "Lucien." He looked up at her at last. "The whispers have begun." Cold moved through her stomach despite the warmth of the room. "Already? Earlier than expected." He crossed toward the fire and handed her the letter. Seraphina unfolded the thick cream paper slowly. No signature appeared beneath the elegant handwriting. Of course not. Aristocratic cruelty rarely arrived honestly. She read the first lines once. Then again more carefully. "The Duchess of Ravenshire appears unusually fatigued of late. One hopes her delicate condition is merely winter illness and not the consequence of unfortunate indiscretion." Seraphina felt the blood drain slowly from her face. Lucien watched her in silence. "Who sent this?" "Lady Penhest received it anonymously yesterday morning." His voice remained calm. "By dinner, half of Mayfair had already discussed your health." Seraphina lowered the paper gradually. "That quickly? London grows bored during winter." His eyes darkened. "Scandal entertains them." She stared into the fire for several long seconds while unease coiled tighter inside her chest. "Perhaps it will fade." Lucien's expression revealed exactly what he thought of that hope. "No," he said quietly. "It will escalate." As though summoned by the words themselves, another knock sounded sharply against the library doors. The butler entered with visible caution carrying a silver tray. Upon it rested a folded newspaper freshly delivered from London. Lucien accepted it immediately. His jaw hardened before he even finished unfolding the front page. Seraphina moved closer. "What happened?" He handed her the paper without a word. Her eyes found the article instantly because someone had circled it in dark ink. "Society continues wondering whether the mysterious transformation of the Duke of Ravenshire is genuine affection or merely another carefully staged performance. Rumors surrounding the Duchess's health only deepen speculation regarding the true nature of their unusual marriage." Seraphina's fingers tightened around the newspaper. Beneath the article, someone had scribbled another sentence by hand. "Can a man incapable of loving a woman truly father an heir?" Silence swallowed the library. The fire crackled softly behind them. Somewhere far down the corridor a clock chimed the quarter hour. Seraphina stared at the final sentence while humiliation spread slowly beneath her skin like freezing water. Not because she believed the accusation, because she understood exactly what London intended. They were not merely questioning the child. They were questioning her dignity, her marriage, her worth as a duchess. Lucien took the paper from her hands with dangerous calm. Then he walked toward the fire and dropped it directly into the flames. The parchment curled instantly beneath the heat. "Lucien," He remained staring into the burning paper while smoke twisted upward through the golden firelight. I warned them once already. You cannot wage war against every rumor in London. No, his voice lowered. But I can decide how expensive those rumors become. Seraphina studied him carefully. The stillness in him frightened her more than anger would have. You are thinking about retaliation. I am thinking about prevention. Those are rarely the same thing with you. That almost earned another smile. Almost. Lucien crossed back toward her slowly. Listen to me carefully. His fingers brushed lightly against her wrist. You will not attend public gatherings for the next several weeks. Lucien. No opera. No balls. No charity functions. His expression remained absolute. Until I understand who is behind this, you remain here. Seraphina felt frustration rise beneath her fear. I will not hide in Ravenshire Manor like a criminal. You are not the criminal. Then why must I behave like one? For the first time since the whispers began, real emotion cracked through his control. Because they are hunting weakness. The words hit the room hard enough to silence both of them afterward. Lucien exhaled slowly through his nose and looked away first. I spent years allowing society to believe whatever made them comfortable, he said more quietly. Cold, unfeeling, strange, protected me. His gaze returned to hers. But now they are using those lies against you. Seraphina's anger softened instantly beneath the strain in his voice. She stepped closer. Lucien, I should have prepared better. Prepared for gossip? Prepared for war. The last word barely rose above a whisper. Outside the library windows, the fog thickened across the estate grounds until the world beyond the glass nearly vanished completely. Candlelight flickered across Lucien's face while tension sharpened the lines near his mouth. Seraphina suddenly understood something then with frightening clarity. The Duke of Ravenshire was not afraid of scandal itself. He was afraid because this child had given his enemies a way to wound him for the first time in years. She touched his cheek softly before he could retreat behind restraint again. Look at me. He obeyed immediately. I married you knowing London feared you. Her thumb brushed lightly near his jaw. Let them whisper. Pain flickered briefly across his expression. You still think whispers remain harmless. Before she could answer, another servant appeared breathlessly in the doorway. Your Grace. Lucien turned instantly cold again. What is it? The young footman swallowed hard. There is a lady requesting audience downstairs. Name. Lady Victoria Hollowmere. Silence dropped over the room like falling ice. Seraphina felt Lucien's entire body go still beside her. Not surprise. Recognition. The footman continued nervously. She says the matter concerns the future heir of Ravenshire. Lucien's eyes darkened with terrifying calm. Send her away. Your Grace? The servant stammered softly. She claims she carries proof London will soon demand to see. The fire cracked sharply behind them. Seraphina slowly looked toward her husband. Lucien said nothing for several long seconds. Then at last he spoke with enough quiet menace to chill the air itself. Bring Lady Hollowmere to the black drawing room. Lady Victoria Hollowmere entered the black drawing room precisely as the grandfather clock struck 3. Snow still clung to the hem of her deep burgundy traveling cloak while candlelight flashed against the diamonds at her throat each time she moved. She looked magnificent in the dangerous way certain women did when beauty became sharpened by cruelty rather than softened by kindness. The drawing room itself seemed built for confrontation. Dark paneled walls. Tall windows dimmed by winter fog. Black marble fireplace crowned with silver candelabras that cast restless shadows across the room. Even the air felt colder here. Seraphina stood near the fireplace with one hand resting lightly against the mantel, while Lucien occupied the space beside the windows like a storm waiting for permission to break. Victoria's eyes moved between them slowly, calculating, amused. Your Grace, she said smoothly while lowering into a graceful curtsy toward Seraphina. How radiant you appear this winter. Seraphina returned the stare evenly. Lady Hollowmere. Victoria straightened. And Your Grace. Her gaze slid toward Lucien. Still terrifying, I see. Lucien did not invite her to sit. You claimed to possess information regarding my family. Victoria removed her gloves finger by finger with deliberate elegance. Straight to business. How disappointing. I had hoped marriage softened you slightly. You hoped many things where I am concerned. The room cooled several degrees beneath the quiet menace in his voice. Victoria smiled anyway. And yet here we are. She crossed toward the seating area without permission and settled herself upon the velvet sofa nearest the fire. The movement alone bordered on insult within a ducal household. Seraphina noticed immediately. So did Lucien. Neither acknowledged it. Victoria folded her gloves carefully across her lap. London has become rather fascinated lately. London frequently confuses fascination with boredom, Seraphina replied calmly. Victoria's smile widened slightly. Ah, there she is. Her eyes lingered on Seraphina with open curiosity now. The quiet bride who suddenly learned how to fight back. Lucien stepped forward at once. You are wasting my time. Victoria glanced toward him lazily. No, Lucien. The use of his first name struck the room sharply. I am attempting to save yours. Silence followed. Seraphina felt tension tighten invisibly through the air between them. Victoria noticed her observation immediately. Of course she did. You never told your wife? She asked softly. Lucien's expression remained unreadable. Careful. Victoria leaned back against the sofa cushions. How cold that sounded. Her gaze drifted toward Seraphina again. You know, Your Grace, there was a time when half of London believed I might become Duchess of Ravenshire. Seraphina did not look at Lucien. I imagine half of London must feel terribly disappointed. A brief flash crossed Victoria's face before her smile returned. You are sharper than people realize. People often mistake politeness for weakness. And does your husband agree? Lucien's voice cut cleanly across the room. Enough. Victoria's eyes lifted toward him slowly. Still protective. Still reckless. The silence after that exchange carried history beneath it. Not romance. Not affection. Something colder. Seraphina recognized it immediately. These were two people who understood each other too well and trusted each other not at all. Victoria sighed softly. Very well. Let us stop pretending this visit concerns courtesy. She reached into the reticule resting beside her and withdrew several folded papers sealed with dark wax. These began circulating privately yesterday evening. Lucien crossed the room in 3 controlled strides and took the papers from her hand before Seraphina could reach them first. He unfolded the first page slowly. Seraphina watched his expression harden by degrees while he read. What is it? He handed the papers toward her without answering. The moment her eyes found the handwriting, cold moved through her chest. They were copies of anonymous letters. Different handwriting, different seals, yet all carried the same poisonous implication. The Duke of Ravenshire avoided women for years. The Duchess conceived suspiciously quickly. Certain timelines deserve closer examination. Another read more cruelly. A miracle indeed. London wonders whether the future heir resembles Ravenshire blood at all. Seraphina lowered the papers gradually. Heat burned beneath her skin despite the winter air. Humiliation arrived strangely quiet sometimes. Not like a wound. Like a room full of people watching to see whether you would survive the insult gracefully enough to entertain them. Victoria observed her carefully. Cruel, are they not? Lucien spoke before Seraphina could answer. Who distributed these? No signature. Victoria crossed one elegant leg over the other. But society enjoys patterns. Certain names continue appearing near the whispers. Names. Minor lords. Political rivals. A newspaper editor with gambling debts. She paused. And one cabinet minister who has hated your influence for years. Lucien's jaw tightened once. Westmore. Victoria smiled faintly. You always were clever. Seraphina studied the woman before her more carefully now. Why bring these here? Victoria's gaze slid toward her. Because unlike the rest of London, I prefer my scandals alive. Lucien's expression darkened dangerously. "Explain yourself." "Oh, do not look so murderous." Victoria rose gracefully from the sofa and crossed toward the fire. "If society destroys your wife publicly before spring, the resulting chaos will stain every aristocratic family attached to this scandal." Her eyes lifted toward Seraphina again. "Including mine." Seraphina heard the truth hidden beneath the explanation immediately. Victoria did not care about morality. She cared about survival. "You are protecting yourself," Seraphina said quietly. Victoria's smile sharpened. "Naturally." Lucien stepped closer. "And what do you expect in return?" "Nothing unreasonable." Victoria turned toward him fully now. "Attend the Winter Opera Gala next week." Silence dropped instantly across the room. Seraphina frowned slightly. "An opera?" "Not merely an opera." Victoria moved nearer the firelight until the diamonds around her throat flashed brilliantly beneath the candles. "The opera event of the season. Every major family in London will attend." Understanding settled slowly through Seraphina's chest. "You want us displayed publicly." "I want speculation interrupted before it becomes certainty." Victoria folded her hands lightly before her waist. "At present, society survives on whispers because no one has seen the Duchess recently." Her gaze lowered briefly toward Seraphina's abdomen before lifting again. "Disappear longer, and they will assume the worst." Lucien's voice turned colder still. "You presume to advise me regarding my wife." "I presume nothing." Victoria tilted her head slightly. "I simply understand London better than you wish to." The room fell quiet again except for the steady crackle of the fire. Seraphina looked toward Lucien carefully. She already knew what he was thinking. Public appearance meant exposure, risk, observation. Yet hiding carried its own danger now. Absence fed rumors more effectively than scandal itself. Lucien finally spoke. "No." Victoria blinked once. "No. I will not parade my wife through a ballroom while half of London waits to insult her." The force beneath his calm voice silenced even Victoria briefly. Seraphina watched him closely. He meant every word. This was not pride anymore. It was protection sharpened into instinct. Victoria recovered first. "Then London wins." Lucien's eyes moved toward her with frightening stillness. "London has never won against me." "No." Victoria's voice softened unexpectedly. "But this time you are not the only target." That landed. Seraphina saw it in the slight tightening near Lucien's mouth. Victoria moved toward the doors slowly before stopping one final time beside Seraphina. "For what it is worth," she said quietly. "They are cruel because they are afraid of you now." Seraphina met her gaze evenly. "Afraid of what?" Victoria's eyes flickered briefly toward Lucien across the room. A woman capable of becoming the only thing Lucien Ravenshire would destroy the world to protect. Then she left beneath the hush of rustling velvet and closing doors. Silence swallowed the drawing room immediately afterward. Lucien remained motionless beside the windows while snow drifted endlessly beyond the darkened glass. Seraphina crossed toward him carefully. She was right about one thing. Victoria Hollowmere has never been right about anything. If we continue hiding, the rumors will worsen. Lucien looked down at her sharply. "You cannot possibly wish to attend that opera." "I wish to stop running from whispers." His expression hardened. "This is not about whispers anymore." "Then what is it about?" For the first time all afternoon, emotion cracked visibly through his control. "It is about the fact that every person in that theater will look at you and wonder whether my child is legitimate." The words struck harder spoken aloud. Lucien looked away instantly afterward as though he regretted giving shape to the fear itself. Seraphina stepped closer. "And what if they do?" He stared out toward the snow-covered estate grounds in silence. Then finally he said very quietly, "I do not know if I can remain civilized if they humiliate you again." The confession settled low in her chest with dangerous warmth. Lucien closed his eyes briefly before speaking once more. "I spent years convincing London I felt nothing." His voice roughened almost imperceptibly. Now I am discovering what a catastrophic mistake that was. The Royal Winter Opera glittered beneath thousands of candles, while snow fell softly beyond the towering arched windows of the theater like pale ash drifting through the London night. Carriages lined the entire street outside. Noble families stepped carefully across crimson carpets while footmen hurried through the cold carrying velvet cloaks, opera glasses, and whispered gossip from one aristocratic gathering to the next. Inside, the opera house hummed with anticipation sharp enough to feel dangerous. Not because of the performance, because the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire had accepted attendance after nearly disappearing from society for weeks. Every person in London understood what tonight truly was. Not entertainment, observation, judgment disguised beneath chandeliers and silk. Seraphina stood in the private Ravenshire box overlooking the massive theater below, while musicians tuned instruments somewhere beneath the stage. The gold-embroidered ivory gown she wore shimmered softly beneath candlelight without drawing attention toward her figure too obviously. Lucien himself had rejected 3 previous dresses before finally approving this one with visible dissatisfaction toward the entire concept of public appearances. Now he stood beside her dressed entirely in black formal evening attire that made him look less like an aristocrat attending the opera and more like a man arriving to negotiate surrender terms after war. The moment they entered the theater 20 minutes earlier, conversation across the entire opera house had faltered. Seraphina still felt the weight of those stares lingering like pressure against her skin. Lucien noticed every single one. "You are regretting this already?" she murmured quietly while pretending to adjust one of her gloves. "I regretted it the moment the carriage crossed into Mayfair. Yet you came." His gaze swept slowly across the crowded balconies surrounding them. "You wished to stop hiding. And you?" Lucien's expression remained coldly unreadable. "I wish to remind London that you are not unprotected." The orchestra began warming into the opening arrangement below, though few guests seemed interested in the music itself. Across the opera house, women whispered behind jeweled fans while gentlemen studied the Ravenshire box with careful discretion that fooled absolutely no one. Seraphina recognized several familiar faces immediately. Cabinet ministers, wealthy widows, political rivals, families who once avoided Lucien entirely and now watched him with nervous fascination because the feared Duke of Ravenshire had suddenly become something infinitely more unpredictable. A husband with something to lose. "Lady Penhest has not looked away from us once," Seraphina noted softly. Lucien did not glance toward the woman. "Her husband owes me £40,000. Ah! She fears poverty more than scandal. How reassuring." The corner of Lucien's mouth almost moved before stillness reclaimed him. A knock sounded lightly against the private box door. Lucien's expression cooled instantly. One of the opera attendants bowed nervously after entering. "Your Grace, Lady Hollowmere sends her compliments and requests permission to join you briefly before the performance begins." Lucien answered without hesitation. "Denied." The attendant swallowed hard. "Very good, Your Grace. And inform Lady Hollowmere that if she attempts entering this box uninvited, she will discover exactly how little patience I possess tonight." "Yes, Your Grace." The young man vanished almost immediately afterward. Seraphina exhaled softly once the door closed again. "You are terrifying half the opera house." "Only half." His attention shifted toward the lower-level seats. "Disappointing." Despite herself, warmth flickered briefly through her chest. Lucien had become sharper during the past several days. More dangerous. Yet beneath that sharpened control she sensed exhaustion tightening invisibly through him. He had not truly relaxed once since the rumors began. Suddenly movement below caught Seraphina's attention. A cluster of noblewomen near the central aisle turned deliberately toward the Ravenshire box while whispering openly behind lace fans. One woman laughed softly. Another looked directly at Seraphina's waist before saying something that caused the entire group to smile. The humiliation arrived quietly. Familiar, aristocratic cruelty rarely shouted. It simply made certain you noticed being discussed. Lucien saw it immediately. She felt the shift beside her before he even spoke. "Do not look at them." "I was not." "You were." His jaw tightened once. And now I am considering whether accidental exile to Scotland might improve London society. Seraphina touched his sleeve lightly before he could spiral further into cold fury. Lucien. His eyes moved toward her instantly. I am fine. No, his voice lowered dangerously. You are enduring this. Before she could answer, another voice drifted upward from the neighboring box close enough to carry clearly through the thin velvet partitions separating the aristocratic seating areas. Really? I hardly see how the timing can be proper. A woman laughed softly afterward. Perhaps miracles do happen at Ravenshire Manor after all. Another voice answered lower but no less cruel. Or perhaps miracles are not the correct word. The meaning settled through the air like poison. Seraphina went perfectly still. Across the theater, the orchestra began the opening notes of the opera at last. Violins swelled beneath golden chandeliers while applause echoed through the grand hall. Yet inside the Ravenshire box, silence turned sharp enough to cut. Lucien's hand closed slowly around the railing before him. Too slowly. The polished wood creaked faintly beneath the pressure of his grip. Lucien. He did not answer. The neighboring voices continued behind the partition. Surely no one truly believes Ravenshire capable of affection. The Duchess appears devoted enough for both of them. Devotion alone does not create heirs. Soft laughter followed. Seraphina's stomach tightened painfully. She looked toward the stage instead of the partition because years of aristocratic survival had taught her one essential truth. Humiliation became spectacle the moment people saw it wound you openly. But beside her, Lucien moved. Slowly, deliberately, terrifyingly calm. He crossed the private box without haste and opened the partition door separating their section from the neighboring one. Conversation next door stopped instantly. Seraphina rose at once. Lucien. He ignored her completely. The neighboring box contained 3 ladies and 2 older lords seated beneath glittering candlelight with expressions frozen somewhere between shock and panic. One woman still held her fan half raised before her mouth. Lucien looked at each of them in silence. No raised voice. No visible anger. Somehow that made the atmosphere far worse. Continue, he said quietly. No one moved. One of the gentlemen attempted nervous politeness first. Your Grace, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. No, Lucien's gaze settled on the woman who had laughed earlier. I understood perfectly. The lady paled immediately beneath his attention. I assure you, we meant no offense toward the Duchess. Then your intelligence disappoints me almost as much as your manners. Silence swallowed the neighboring box completely. Even the music below seemed distant now. Lucien took one controlled step forward. You mistake restraint for permission. His voice remained soft enough that nearby guests leaned subtly closer trying to overhear. My wife will not spend this evening listening to cowards whisper behind silk fans because society lacks the courage to insult her directly. The older lord nearest the aisle cleared his throat uneasily. Your Grace, perhaps this conversation should remain private. Lucien turned his head slightly toward the man. Nothing concerning the Duchess of Ravenshire remains private anymore. Your friends ensured that. The woman with the fan finally spoke again, though her voice trembled visibly now. I never intended harm. No. Lucien's expression remained horrifyingly composed. Then perhaps you should explain precisely what you intended when discussing my child's legitimacy in a public theater. Around them, nearby conversations across several surrounding boxes had already faded into open silence. People were watching now. Entire sections of the opera house pretending not to stare while missing absolutely nothing. The woman lowered her eyes immediately. Lucien waited. 1 second. 2. Then finally he spoke again. You owe the Duchess an apology. Seraphina felt every gaze in the opera house shifting toward their box now. Heat rose beneath her skin despite the cold tension filling the air. The woman swallowed hard before turning toward her. Your Grace, she whispered shakily. I apologize. Lucien's eyes never left the woman's face. Louder. Shock rippled visibly through the neighboring box. Even Seraphina's breath caught slightly. The woman looked genuinely horrified now. Your Grace, please. You wished the theater to hear your cruelty. Lucien's voice lowered further. Now let them hear your shame. The woman's hands trembled against her lap. Then finally she looked toward Seraphina properly for the first time all evening. I apologize, Duchess. Her voice carried clearly this time across the nearby boxes. Silence followed afterward. Heavy. Humiliating. Final. Lucien stepped back at last without another word and returned to the Ravenshire box beside Seraphina. The partition door shut softly behind him. The opera music swelled below while the theater struggled awkwardly to pretend society had not just witnessed a public execution conducted entirely through manners. Seraphina stared at him once they stood alone again. Lucien. His breathing remained steady. Too steady. They will hate you for that. Good. He reached for her hand immediately as though confirming she remained physically there beside him. His fingers felt colder than usual. Seraphina looked down briefly and realized with sudden alarm that his hand was shaking almost imperceptibly beneath hers. Lucien Ravenshire noticed her noticing. He withdrew his hand at once. Lucien. I am fine. You are trembling. His jaw hardened sharply. I am controlling myself. The quiet honesty of that answer frightened her more than the confrontation itself. Outside the opera house, snow continued falling over London, while whispers spread through aristocratic society faster than wildfire. And for the first time in years, the city realized something dangerous beyond scandal itself. The Duke of Ravenshire had stopped pretending not to care. By the time the Ravenshire carriage returned from the opera, snow had buried most of London beneath a pale frozen silence. The manor stood illuminated against the winter darkness like a fortress carved from candlelight and stone, every window glowing gold through the storm while guards moved visibly along the outer gates carrying lanterns through the swirling snow. Seraphina noticed the additional men immediately the moment the carriage stopped beneath the front entrance. So did Lucien. His expression hardened further. You doubled security again, she murmured quietly as the footman opened the carriage door. Lucien stepped down first before turning to offer her his hand. Triple. Lucien. Someone leaked information before the opera tonight. Snow caught in the dark strands of his hair while he guided her carefully toward the entrance. I intend to discover who. The massive front doors opened before they reached them. Warmth flooded outward immediately along with the scent of burning cedarwood and polished pine. Yet despite the familiar comfort of Ravenshire Manor, tension waited just beyond the threshold. The butler stood unnaturally rigid near the entrance hall staircase. Two housemaids avoided looking directly at either of them. And near the far corridor leading toward the east wing, Seraphina noticed another unfamiliar guard posted beside the doors. Lucien saw her noticing. No one enters the private residential corridors after midnight now. You speak as though we are under siege. His gray eyes settled on her calmly. We are. The answer followed her all the way upstairs. An hour later, Seraphina stood inside her dressing room, while Clara carefully removed the final jeweled pins from her hair. The young maid's hands trembled faintly each time she reached near the Duchess's shoulders. You are nervous tonight, Seraphina observed gently while studying their reflection in the mirror. Clara flushed immediately. Forgive me, Your Grace. There is nothing to forgive. The maid lowered her eyes. The staff has been speaking about the opera. Seraphina remained very still. I imagine London has as well. Clara hesitated before answering. They say His Grace looked ready to destroy the entire theater. A strange warmth moved quietly through Seraphina's chest despite everything. She looked toward the mirror again and caught sight of Lucien crossing the bedroom behind her through the open connecting doors. Even now, hours later, tension remained visible in the rigid line of his shoulders. Clara followed her gaze toward the Duke before lowering her eyes quickly again. The servants have never seen him behave that way for anyone, the maid whispered softly. Then almost immediately she looked horrified at her own boldness. Forgive me, Your Grace. I should not have spoken. Seraphina's expression softened slightly. You spoke honestly. Lucien entered the dressing room at that exact moment carrying several folded documents in one hand. Clara. The maid nearly dropped the hairbrush. Your Grace. Leave us. Yes, Your Grace. She hurried from the room so quickly the door barely closed before silence settled behind her. Lucien crossed toward the fireplace while scanning the documents without apparent interest. Seraphina watched him for several seconds before speaking. You frightened the household tonight. Good. That answer cannot solve every problem. It solves many. He tossed the papers onto a nearby table with visible irritation. Seraphina rose slowly from the vanity chair and crossed toward him. What now? 3 more articles appeared before we even left the opera. He removed his gloves 1 finger at a time with sharp controlled movements. Someone delivered information to the newspapers before tonight began. What kind of information? Descriptions of your appearance. Speculation regarding the pregnancy. His expression darkened further. Details no one should possess. Cold slipped quietly down Seraphina's spine. You think someone inside Ravenshire Manor is speaking to London. I know they are. The certainty in his voice unsettled her more than the accusation itself. Lucien crossed toward the sideboard and poured himself a drink he barely touched afterward. Mrs. Whitmore confirmed one of the downstairs maids received unexplained money 2 days ago. Who? She disappeared this morning before questioning. Seraphina stared at him. Disappeared. Left employment abruptly. He looked toward her over the rim of the untouched glass. At least that is the explanation currently being offered. Silence tightened through the room. Outside the windows, wind rattled faintly against the frozen glass, while snow continued swallowing the estate grounds beyond sight. Seraphina wrapped her arms loosely around herself. This is becoming dangerous. Lucien set the untouched drink aside immediately. You are cold. Lucien. He crossed toward her without hesitation. His hands settled gently over her arms before sliding lower to warm her fingers between his palms. The movement looked instinctive now, protective in ways neither of them questioned anymore. I should never have taken you to the opera. No, she lifted her eyes toward him. You should have. You were humiliated publicly. And you defended me publicly. Something flickered across his face then. Not pride. Pain. That should not have been necessary. Seraphina's gaze softened despite herself. You cannot shield me from every cruel person in England. Watch me try. The answer arrived instantly. Too instantly. Lucien seemed to realize it himself a moment later because tension flashed briefly across his features afterward. Seraphina almost smiled. Almost. Then movement outside the bedroom doors interrupted the fragile warmth between them. Footsteps. Fast. Nervous. A sharp knock followed immediately afterward. Lucien's entire demeanor changed at once. The softness vanished. Enter. One of the younger footmen stepped into the room pale with obvious distress. Your Grace. Lucien moved slightly in front of Seraphina before answering. What is it? Mrs. Whitmore requested I inform you immediately. The young servant swallowed hard. Someone entered the West Nursery tonight. Silence fell heavily across the room. Seraphina frowned faintly. The nursery? The West Nursery had remained unused for years. Earlier that week, however, Mrs. Whitmore had begun quietly preparing the rooms after learning of the pregnancy. Lucien's expression turned frighteningly still. Who discovered it? One of the maids bringing fresh linens. And the footman shifted uneasily. The cradle had been moved, Your Grace. Cold spread slowly through Seraphina's chest. Lucien's voice lowered dangerously. Explain clearly. There was a note left inside the cradle. The room seemed to narrow around them. What note? The Duke asked quietly. The servant hesitated only a second too long. Lucien stepped forward once. Read it. The footman's face drained completely of color. Some bloodlines should end before they begin. Silence swallowed the bedroom whole. Seraphina felt Lucien's hands leave her arms slowly. Not because he wished distance. Because fury moved through him so suddenly even he no longer trusted stillness. The footman lowered his gaze immediately toward the floor. Mrs. Whitmore burned the note at once. Good. Lucien's voice sounded terrifyingly calm now. No one discusses this beyond the staff already aware. Yes, Your Grace. And bring Mr. Mercer to my study immediately. The servant vanished almost instantly. The moment the doors closed, Seraphina turned toward Lucien fully. Lucien. He said nothing. He simply crossed toward the fireplace and braced one hand against the marble mantel while staring into the flames with rigid stillness. Lucien. I should have anticipated escalation after tonight. This is not your fault. His laugh came low and humorless. Everything threatening you inside this house is my fault. She crossed toward him immediately. Do not say that. Why not? He finally turned toward her. Candlelight carved sharp shadows across his face while anger simmered beneath every controlled breath. Because it is true. No, Seraphina. His voice roughened unexpectedly. Someone entered a nursery intended for our child and left a threat under my roof. The final words landed with quiet devastation. She reached for his hand before he could retreat further into fury. Look at me. He obeyed instantly despite the tension radiating through him. You are not failing me. Pain flickered through his eyes. I do not know how to exist in a world where you become vulnerable because of loving me. The honesty of the confession stole her breath. Lucien lowered his forehead briefly against hers as though exhaustion itself had finally become too heavy to carry upright. I spent years convincing myself isolation was strength, he murmured quietly. Now every room without you in it feels unbearable. Seraphina closed her eyes for one fragile second. His hand tightened around hers. Then suddenly his entire body went still. The shift happened so quickly her eyes opened immediately. What is it? Lucien looked toward the bedroom doors. Listening. Somewhere far down the corridor, faint footsteps echoed briefly against marble floors before disappearing into silence again. Too fast. Too careful. His expression darkened at once. Stay here. Lucien. Lock the doors after me. He crossed toward the corridor, already reaching for the concealed pistol kept inside the carved desk drawer near the entrance. Seraphina's pulse tightened sharply. Lucien. He paused only long enough to look back at her once. Gray eyes. Cold eyes. Terrified eyes hidden beneath control. Someone is still awake in this house, he said quietly. And I no longer believe that is accidental. Lucien did not return to their chambers until nearly dawn. By then the storm outside had faded into a gray frozen silence that left Ravenshire Manor feeling suspended somewhere between night and morning. Seraphina had not slept. She sat curled near the fire wrapped in a velvet robe, while candlelight burned low around the room and shadows shifted restlessly across the walls each time the flames moved. The moment the doors finally opened, she stood immediately. Lucien entered alone. Snow clung faintly to the shoulders of his black coat despite the covered corridors connecting the estate wings. His hair looked damp from melted frost, and exhaustion sharpened every severe line of his face. Yet it was his expression that tightened Seraphina's chest most. He looked colder now, more distant, not from her, from everyone else in the world. What happened? She asked quietly. Lucien closed the doors behind him before answering. No intruder was found, but someone was in the corridor. Yes. He removed his gloves slowly. And someone entered the nursery. Seraphina crossed toward him at once. Did you question the staff? Every servant awake after midnight. His voice remained low and controlled. No one saw anything useful. She studied him carefully. You do not believe them. I believe fear makes people selective with truth. Lucien crossed toward the fireplace and stopped there for several seconds, staring into the flames without moving further. Seraphina noticed the pistol still tucked inside his coat. That unsettled her more than she wished to admit. You have not slept. Neither have you. Lucien. He finally looked toward her fully. The exhaustion in his eyes revealed itself for one unguarded second before restraint covered it again. Mr. Mercer searched the east and west wings personally. 2 guards have been replaced. Every exterior entrance is now locked after sundown. His jaw tightened once. And beginning today, no servant remains employed here without full background investigation. Seraphina exhaled softly. You are turning Ravenshire Manor into a fortress. It failed to protect you as a home. Silence followed. Heavy, painfully honest. She moved closer carefully. You cannot carry every threat alone. Watch me. The answer came instantly again. Reflexive now. Seraphina reached toward him, but another knock interrupted before her fingers touched his sleeve. Lucien's entire posture hardened immediately. Enter. Mrs. Whitmore stepped inside with visible hesitation. The longtime housekeeper looked more unsettled than Seraphina had ever seen her. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace. Her eyes moved carefully between them. There is a visitor downstairs requesting immediate audience. Lucien's expression darkened. At this hour? She insists the matter concerns the safety of the Duchess. Name. Mrs. Whitmore hesitated briefly. Lady Agatha Blackwell. Something shifted across Lucien's face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. Seraphina noticed at once. You know her. Unfortunately. He looked toward the windows where pale morning light barely touched the frost-covered glass. Lady Blackwell rarely travels unless disaster follows closely behind. 20 minutes later, Seraphina entered the green drawing room beside Lucien, while dawn slowly brightened the winter sky beyond the tall windows. Lady Agatha Blackwell stood near the fireplace wrapped in deep navy velvet trimmed with silver fox fur. She appeared perhaps 60 years old, though the sharpness in her dark eyes suggested age had failed to dull anything important. Unlike most aristocratic women of her generation, she wore almost no jewelry beyond a single black sapphire ring. Power radiated from her anyway, quiet, unapologetic, dangerous. She turned as they entered. Lucien. Lady Blackwell. Her gaze shifted immediately toward Seraphina. Not toward her waist. Not toward gossip. Toward her face. Measuring something deeper there. So this is the woman London suddenly fears. Seraphina inclined her head politely. Lady Blackwell. Agatha studied her for another moment before speaking again. You look exhausted. Lucien stepped subtly closer to Seraphina without seeming to move at all. Lady Blackwell noticed. A faint expression crossed her face that looked disturbingly close to pity. You truly love her, she murmured quietly. Lucien's expression turned glacial. State your purpose. Agatha sighed softly and crossed toward the seating area near the fire. Straight to threats already. How nostalgic. Neither Lucien nor Seraphina sat. Lady Blackwell seemed unsurprised by that. She removed one glove slowly before continuing. You are making mistakes. Lucien's eyes narrowed dangerously. Careful. No, Agatha lifted her gaze calmly toward him. You be careful. The room cooled several degrees. Seraphina sensed history between them immediately. Not intimacy. Something older. Sharper. You know who is behind the rumors, Lucien said quietly. I know who began them. Agatha folded her gloves carefully onto the table beside her. And unless you stop reacting emotionally, you will walk your wife directly into the same trap they attempted years ago. Silence fell instantly. Seraphina looked toward Lucien. His jaw tightened once. Explain. Agatha's eyes moved toward Seraphina now. You know London believes your husband incapable of loving women. Yes. What you do not know is that rumor did not begin naturally. A strange stillness settled over the room. Even the fire seemed quieter suddenly. Agatha continued calmly. 15 years ago, Lucien embarrassed several very powerful men by refusing participation in certain political alliances. Her gaze flickered briefly toward Lucien, including a marriage arrangement involving a minister's daughter. Seraphina frowned slightly. So they created rumors. Not immediately. Agatha's expression darkened faintly. First they attempted scandal through gambling, then debt, then accusations involving political corruption. All failed, Lucien said coldly. Yes. Agatha looked directly at him. Because even then you were too disciplined. Silence followed again. Then quietly she added, so they attacked your masculinity instead. The words landed heavily in the room. Seraphina felt Lucien go perfectly still beside her. Agatha continued without hesitation. The rumors spread because society needed an explanation for why one of England's most powerful dukes avoided women, rejected marriage proposals, and refused producing an heir. Her expression sharpened. People fear what they cannot categorize. It became easier for London to believe you incapable of desire than emotionally unreachable. Lucien's voice lowered dangerously. You traveled through a snowstorm to repeat history I already know. No, Agatha reached into her reticule and withdrew several folded letters tied together with dark ribbon. I came because history is repeating more precisely than you realize. She handed the letters toward Seraphina directly. Read the signatures. Seraphina unfolded the first page slowly. The handwriting appeared elegant, political, controlled. Her eyes moved downward toward the signature at the bottom. Lord Edwin Westmore. Cold slipped through her chest. She opened another letter. Another signature. Another prominent political family. Then another. The final letter bore no signature at all. Only a sentence written sharply across the bottom margin. If Ravenshire produces an heir, our influence ends with him. Silence swallowed the drawing room. Seraphina looked toward Lucien slowly. They planned this for years. Yes, Agatha answered quietly before he could speak. Because a solitary duke remains manageable. A duke with a legitimate heir becomes dynastic power. Lucien's expression darkened with terrifying calm. Where did you obtain these? From a man clever enough to preserve copies and cowardly enough to sell them. Agatha's eyes shifted toward Seraphina again. The important matter is not the letters themselves. It is understanding what they reveal. Which is? Seraphina asked softly. Agatha's gaze sharpened. This was never about scandal. The older woman leaned forward slightly. It was always about preventing Lucien Ravenshire from building a family powerful enough to threaten the political order surrounding him. The fire cracked sharply behind them. Lucien said nothing, yet Seraphina sensed fury tightening through him with dangerous precision. Agatha watched him carefully. And now you are behaving exactly as they hoped. Meaning, his voice turned lethal. You are isolating your wife. Agatha's answer arrived instantly. Terrifying servants. Threatening society publicly. Turning every rumor into proof that Ravenshire Manor hides something unstable. Lucien's eyes darkened. You presume much. I understand politics. Agatha stood slowly from her chair. Fear creates monsters faster than scandal ever does. Seraphina looked down again toward the letters in her hands. One line near the bottom of the final page caught her attention suddenly. Her pulse tightened. Lucien. He looked toward her immediately. This handwriting. She lifted the unsigned letter carefully. I have seen it before. The room fell still. Where? He asked quietly. Seraphina's fingers tightened around the paper. In Victoria Hollomere's carriage. Silence dropped like ice between them. Agatha closed her eyes briefly as though confirming something she already suspected. Lucien's expression became terrifyingly blank. You are certain? Yes. Seraphina looked toward him fully now. There was a document on the seat beside her the day she visited Ravenshire Manor. I only glimpsed the signature briefly, but the handwriting was identical. Lucien took the letter from her hand slowly. His eyes scanned the final lines once before lifting again. Gray, cold, merciless now. Westmore, he said softly. Agatha's expression tightened. Lucien, but he was already moving toward the doors. If Victoria Hollowmere is working directly with Edwin Westmore, he said quietly, then this stopped being gossip weeks ago. Seraphina felt dread tighten beneath her ribs. Lucien. He paused only long enough to look back at her once. Someone has been planning the destruction of our child before it is even born. Then he walked out of the drawing room with the letters still clenched in his hand while the first true light of morning finally broke across the frozen grounds of Ravenshire Manor. The royal winter ball at Ashbourne Palace began beneath a ceiling of crystal chandeliers so vast they resembled captured constellations suspended above the glittering sea of aristocracy below. Music flowed through the enormous ballroom, while silk gowns swept across polished marble floors and noble families, gathered beneath candlelight, pretending elegance mattered more than cruelty. It did not. Tonight the ballroom smelled of anticipation sharpened into bloodless warfare. Seraphina felt it immediately the moment she entered beside the Dowager Duchess of Silvermere. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her at once. Not toward Lucien, toward her. That alone revealed how deeply the rumors had spread. 3 days had passed since Lady Agatha Blackwell exposed the political conspiracy surrounding the Ravenshire heir. 3 days during which Lucien vanished almost entirely into meetings, correspondence, and private investigations conducted behind locked study doors with men who arrived after midnight and left before dawn. Then this morning he informed Seraphina he would not attend the royal ball beside her. At least not initially. "You will arrive with Lady Silvermere," he had said quietly while fastening the clasp around her evening gloves himself. "I will join you later." Seraphina studied him carefully then. "You expect something tonight." "Yes. And you are still sending me there." Pain flickered briefly across his face before disappearing beneath control. "I cannot stop this by hiding you anymore." Now as Seraphina crossed the ballroom beneath the massive chandeliers, she finally understood what he truly meant. The whispers had evolved beyond gossip. This was strategy now. Calculated humiliation designed to isolate her publicly before the entire aristocracy of London. The Dowager Duchess of Silvermere remained beside her like a battle-tested general wrapped in emerald silk and diamonds large enough to blind lesser women with envy. "Keep your shoulders straight," Winifred murmured softly while they descended the grand staircase into the ballroom proper. "Predators smell uncertainty." Seraphina kept her expression composed despite the tightening low in her stomach. "You make this sound delightful." "Oh no, darling." The older Duchess smiled faintly without warmth. "Delightful ended several scandals ago." Music swelled across the ballroom as couples rotated elegantly through a waltz near the center of the floor. Yet even among the dancing nobility, attention continued drifting toward Seraphina in waves impossible to ignore. She recognized the signs now. Sudden silence when she approached certain groups. Ladies glancing subtly toward her waist before lowering their voices. Gentlemen pretending not to stare while observing every movement carefully enough to report it later over brandy and cigars. Winifred noticed everything too. "Westmore arrived 20 minutes ago," she murmured softly. "Victoria is already here." Seraphina's pulse tightened slightly. "Together." No, Winifred's eyes sharpened. People like them rarely stand beside each other publicly. They prefer distance when destroying lives. The orchestra shifted into another arrangement. Nearby servants moved gracefully through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne, while candlelight flashed endlessly across jewels, metals, and polished marble columns. The ballroom itself looked magnificent enough to belong inside a painting. That almost made the cruelty surrounding it feel worse. "Your Grace." Seraphina turned smoothly toward the voice approaching from her left. Lady Penhest offered a curtsy elegant enough to disguise nothing beneath it. Her smile looked carefully sympathetic. "You are looking remarkably well this evening." "How kind." "Marriage appears to suit you." Her gaze lowered almost imperceptibly before returning upward. "Some women truly do bloom unexpectedly." Winifred's expression chilled several degrees beside her. Seraphina answered calmly. "And some women mistake curiosity for subtlety." A faint flush touched Lady Penhest's cheeks. "I only meant that London has worried for your health recently. London concerns itself with many things beyond its intelligence." Lady Penhest laughed lightly though discomfort flickered across her features. "You sound very much like the Duke tonight." "Then perhaps you should be nervous." Silence followed briefly. Then another woman approached. Then another. Within minutes Seraphina found herself surrounded by silk gowns, perfume, and perfectly sharpened smiles disguised as concern. "We were devastated to hear about the stress you have endured lately. The newspapers have been dreadful. Though surely there is no truth to those vulgar rumors. People do become terribly imaginative regarding powerful families." Every sentence carried the same hidden blade beneath it. "Prove yourself. Defend yourself. Explain your child." Seraphina maintained perfect composure because years of aristocratic humiliation had trained her survival instincts too well. Yet beneath the calm exterior, exhaustion slowly tightened through her chest. Lucien was not here. The ballroom knew it too. That made her vulnerable tonight in ways no title could fully shield. Across the room, movement near the grand staircase suddenly shifted the atmosphere. Lady Victoria Hollowmere descended into the ballroom dressed entirely in silver silk that shimmered like moonlight against fresh snow. Diamonds glittered through her dark hair while conversation visibly slowed around her arrival. She looked devastatingly beautiful. More importantly, she looked triumphant. Winifred's expression hardened instantly. There she is. Victoria moved gracefully through the ballroom, accepting greetings with effortless charm before finally allowing her gaze to settle upon Seraphina across the crowded floor. The smile that touched her mouth carried no warmth whatsoever. Seraphina felt the challenge arrive from 30 feet away. Victoria approached slowly enough for nearby conversations to falter in anticipation. By the time she reached their group, half the surrounding ballroom had already begun listening without pretending otherwise. "Your Grace," Victoria said smoothly while lowering into a perfect curtsy. "How radiant motherhood appears upon you." Silence sharpened instantly around them. Seraphina held the woman's gaze evenly. "Lady Hollowmere," Victoria straightened gracefully. "I was uncertain whether you would attend tonight. Disappointment does not suit you." "Oh no." Victoria's smile widened slightly. "Tonight promises many surprises." Winifred stepped subtly closer beside Seraphina. "Careful, Victoria. Always." Victoria reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray without looking away from Seraphina. "Though I confess London has become terribly curious lately." Seraphina remained still. London should seek hobbies less embarrassing. Soft laughter rippled through a few nearby listeners before fading again beneath tension. Victoria lifted her champagne lightly. And yet curiosity persists. Her eyes drifted deliberately toward Seraphina's waist before returning upward. Particularly regarding timing. The ballroom seemed quieter suddenly. Even the orchestra sounded farther away now. Winifred's voice turned sharp enough to cut crystal. "You overstep." Victoria ignored her entirely. "People do wonder, Your Grace." Her tone remained almost conversational. Such remarkable devotion from the Duke after years spent avoiding women altogether. Seraphina's fingers tightened once around her fan. "Your obsession with my marriage grows unhealthy." "Not obsession." Victoria tilted her head slightly. "Fascination." Her smile sharpened. After all, London spent years believing the Duke incapable of fathering children. Then suddenly an heir appears within months of marriage. The surrounding silence deepened visibly. Nearby guests were no longer pretending not to listen. Seraphina felt the humiliation spreading outward through the ballroom in widening circles. Not loud. Worse. Elegant. Controlled. Public. Victoria stepped closer. "Naturally people ask questions." "People without breeding often do," Winifred snapped. Victoria finally glanced toward the older Duchess. "Surely even you must admit the circumstances invite speculation." Then her eyes returned to Seraphina fully. Perhaps the Duchess herself could finally ease society's concerns. Seraphina's heartbeat tightened painfully. "I owe society nothing." "No?" Victoria's voice softened almost sympathetically. "Then perhaps you owe the future Duke of Ravenshire clarity regarding his true father." The sentence landed like shattered glass across the ballroom. Silence followed instantly afterward. Complete. Brutal. Even the orchestra faltered for one terrible heartbeat before recovering again. Seraphina felt every eye in the room turn fully toward her now. Heat climbed beneath her skin while humiliation struck hard enough to blur the edges of the candlelit ballroom for one disorienting second. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Victoria stood perfectly poised before her with champagne still balanced delicately between elegant fingers while aristocratic society held its collective breath waiting to witness whether the Duchess of Ravenshire would finally break. And somewhere beyond the towering ballroom doors, boot steps echoed against marble corridors growing steadily closer. The silence after Victoria's accusation stretched so tightly across the ballroom that even breathing felt indecent. Hundreds of aristocrats stood frozen beneath the towering chandeliers while candlelight trembled across crystal glasses, jeweled gowns, and faces suddenly sharpened by scandal. Seraphina remained perfectly still at the center of it all. Years ago she might have lowered her eyes beneath such cruelty. Years ago she might have felt herself shrinking beneath the weight of public humiliation designed so elegantly no one could openly condemn it. But now only one thought moved quietly through her mind. Lucien had been right. This was war. Victoria watched her carefully, waiting. The entire ballroom waited with her. One wrong movement, one flicker of visible pain. That was all society ever needed to feed itself for months. Winifred's expression had gone cold enough to frost marble. "You disgrace yourself," the Dowager Duchess said sharply. Victoria merely lifted one graceful shoulder. "I asked a reasonable question." "No," Winifred stepped forward. "You attempted a public execution." Soft murmurs spread faintly around the surrounding guests before vanishing again into tense silence. Victoria remained perfectly composed. "Surely the Duchess can answer for herself." Seraphina finally spoke then, quietly, calmly. "You mistake cruelty for courage, Lady Hollowmere." Victoria's smile sharpened. "And you mistake silence for innocence." Heat rose beneath Seraphina's skin despite the winter air sweeping faintly through the enormous ballroom. Around them, noble families leaned subtly closer, pretending fascination with champagne or music while missing absolutely nothing. Seraphina understood the trap clearly now. If she defended herself emotionally, she appeared guilty. If she remained silent, society would interpret shame. Victoria had arranged the attack perfectly. Perhaps, Victoria continued softly, the Duke himself should explain how a man who spent years avoiding women suddenly became England's most devoted husband. Perhaps, a deep voice said from behind the crowd, you should stop speaking before embarrassment becomes irreversible. The ballroom changed instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. Conversation died completely. People stepped aside without being asked. Fear moved through the crowd faster than music. Seraphina turned toward the grand entrance just as Lucien Ravenshire crossed into the ballroom beneath the towering archways of Ashbourne Palace. He wore black evening formal attire severe enough to make every jeweled lord nearby appear decorative rather than powerful. Snow still clung faintly to the shoulders of his coat from the storm outside. Candlelight struck the silver near his temples while his gray eyes moved once across the ballroom with enough cold authority to silence even the orchestra for half a breath. Then his attention settled entirely upon Seraphina. The atmosphere shifted so sharply it almost felt physical. Lucien crossed the marble floor toward her without haste. Without hesitation, aristocrats moved aside immediately in his path. No one wished to stand between the Duke of Ravenshire and his wife tonight. Victoria's expression flickered for the first time since the confrontation began. Not fear exactly, awareness. She understood she had crossed into dangerous territory now. Seraphina remained motionless while Lucien approached. The closer he came, the more clearly she saw the fury beneath his control. Not explosive anger. Worse, precision. He stopped directly beside her. Then, without removing his eyes from Victoria, he reached for Seraphina's hand slowly enough for the entire ballroom to witness the movement clearly. His fingers closed around hers with absolute certainty. Warm, steady, possessive in the quietest possible way. "You should leave," Winifred murmured softly toward Victoria. Victoria ignored her. "Your Grace," she said smoothly, though tension had begun tightening around her mouth now. "We were merely discussing society's concerns." Lucien's expression remained terrifyingly unreadable. "Society," he said quietly, "has survived remarkably long considering how little intelligence it possesses." A few nearby guests visibly stopped breathing. Victoria forced another smile. "People only seek honesty." Lucien finally looked directly at her then. The force of his attention struck the room silent again. "No," he said softly. "People seek permission to be cruel without consequence." The ballroom seemed colder suddenly. Victoria lifted her chin slightly. If the rumors are false, surely clarification should not offend you. Lucien took one measured step forward. Not enough to threaten. Enough to dominate the space entirely. You wish clarification? His voice carried cleanly through the surrounding silence. Very well. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned toward Seraphina. Every person in the ballroom watched him. Lucien's hand lifted carefully toward the curve of her waist beneath the silver-embroidered gown she wore tonight. His palm rested there with astonishing gentleness. Not performance. Not politics. Reverence. The gesture alone struck the ballroom harder than shouting ever could have. Lucien looked toward the surrounding aristocracy once more. Anyone who insults my wife, he said quietly, insults the future of Ravenshire. Silence crashed down afterward. Complete. Total. Even the orchestra had stopped entirely now. Seraphina felt her heartbeat stumble hard enough to ache beneath her ribs. Lucien continued before anyone could recover. You question my child's legitimacy because fear has always been easier for London than understanding. His eyes moved slowly across the gathered nobles. You created stories about me for years because isolation made you comfortable. A man who refused your daughters, your alliances, your expectations. His expression darkened further. Now you discover I chose someone beyond your control, and suddenly society cannot tolerate mystery anymore. No one moved. No one interrupted. Lucien's gaze settled briefly on Lord Edwin Westmore standing near the far edge of the ballroom with visible tension hardening his aristocratic composure. Certain people, Lucien said softly, mistook restraint for weakness. Westmore's face paled almost imperceptibly. Victoria noticed it too. Lucien turned his attention back toward her at last. As for Lady Hollowmere, the ballroom tightened collectively. You seem deeply invested in discussing my marriage. Victoria held his gaze carefully. Only invested in truth. No, Lucien's voice lowered further. You invested in humiliation. The words landed with surgical precision. Victoria's fingers tightened faintly around her champagne glass. Lucien noticed. Of course he did. You entered this ballroom intending to shame the Duchess publicly. He paused briefly. That was your mistake. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered openly across Victoria's face. Lucien took another step closer. You assumed I still cared more about protecting my reputation than protecting my wife. The silence afterward felt enormous. Dangerous. Seraphina could feel it now. The entire ballroom understood something fundamental had changed tonight. The Duke of Ravenshire was no longer the emotionally distant man society once manipulated through rumor and isolation. He had become something infinitely more threatening. A powerful man with devotion strong enough to override caution. Lucien's hand remained steady against Seraphina's waist. Listen carefully, he said softly enough that nearby guests leaned closer despite themselves. If another anonymous letter appears, if another newspaper questions my wife, if another aristocrat repeats gossip regarding my child, his gaze moved slowly across the crowd again. I will consider it a personal declaration of hostility against House Ravenshire. Fear rippled visibly through the surrounding nobles now. Real fear, because everyone present understood Lucien possessed enough wealth, influence, and political power to ruin lives without ever raising his voice. Victoria attempted recovery first. Surely even you cannot threaten all of London. Lucien looked at her with terrifying calm. Watch me. The answer settled over the ballroom like winter itself. Then his attention shifted downward toward Seraphina at last. The fury in his expression softened instantly. Not completely. Enough. His thumb brushed lightly against her gloved hand once. Are you all right? The gentleness in the question nearly undid her more than the humiliation itself ever could have. Seraphina nodded carefully. I am now. Something fragile flickered briefly in his eyes before cold restraint returned. Then Lucien looked beyond her shoulder toward the gathered aristocrats one final time. The evening is over, he said quietly. For anyone foolish enough to continue this conversation, No one challenged him. No one even tried. Because beneath the towering chandeliers of Ashbourne Palace, all of London had finally witnessed the truth hidden beneath years of rumors and silence. The Duke of Ravenshire was not incapable of love. That was the problem. He loved one woman enough to become dangerous for her. London changed within 48 hours of the royal ball. Not publicly. Aristocratic society rarely transformed loudly. Instead, invitations quietly disappeared. Newspapers altered their tone overnight. Gentlemen who once laughed too freely at Ravenshire rumors suddenly avoided discussing the Duke at all. Fear traveled elegantly through noble circles when enough money and power escorted it. Seraphina watched the shift unfold from the tall windows of Ravenshire Manor, while pale winter sunlight spread weakly across the frozen estate grounds below. Snow still covered the gardens in untouched white drifts broken only by guards patrolling the outer paths with increased frequency. Lucien had doubled security again after the ball. She no longer argued about it. The library doors opened behind her. She turned immediately. Lucien entered carrying several documents beneath one arm while removing his gloves with the other hand. Exhaustion sharpened the severe lines of his face more each day now. Yet beneath the fatigue, something colder had settled into him since the ballroom confrontation. Resolve. "You missed breakfast," Seraphina said softly. Lucien crossed toward the fire without answering immediately. "Westmore attempted withdrawing investments from 2 shipping companies this morning. And he discovered I purchased controlling interest last night." A flicker of dark satisfaction touched his expression briefly before vanishing. Seraphina studied him carefully. Lucien. He should have chosen his enemies more intelligently. He placed the documents across the massive desk near the windows. "By noon tomorrow, 3 of his financial partners will sever business ties entirely." Seraphina felt unease tighten quietly through her chest. "You are destroying him." "No," Lucien glanced toward her while loosening the collar of his coat. "I am educating him." She crossed slowly toward the desk. The paper spread across its polished surface revealed lists of shipping routes, political correspondences, and financial ledgers marked heavily in Lucien's handwriting. Names appeared repeatedly throughout the pages. Lords, ministers, banking families, aristocratic dynasties. This is not only about Westmore, she realized quietly. Lucien said nothing. That was answer enough. He reached for another document. Lord Penhest loses parliamentary support by the end of the week. Because his wife insulted me at the opera? Because he financed anonymous publications questioning my heir. His voice remained calm. Actions carry expense. Seraphina stared at him in silence for several seconds. How many people are involved in this? Enough. Lucien. He finally looked directly at her then. You warned me London would not stop with gossip. His expression hardened slightly. You were correct. Candlelight flickered softly across the library while snow tapped lightly against the windows. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood, ink, and exhaustion. Seraphina moved closer to the desk, her eyes catching another familiar name written sharply across one of the ledgers. Victoria Hollowmere. What are you doing to Victoria? She asked carefully. Lucien's jaw tightened once. Removing protection. Meaning, several families currently tolerate her behavior because she provides social leverage. He folded one letter with precise movements. That tolerance becomes expensive after today. Lucien. His eyes lifted toward her again. She humiliated my wife publicly while conspiring with men attempting to destroy my child before birth. The controlled fury beneath the words chilled the room more effectively than winter. What exactly would you prefer I do? Seraphina opened her mouth, then closed it again, because the terrifying truth was she understood him. Not entirely, but enough. Every attack against her had changed something fundamental inside Lucien Ravenshire. Society once believed him emotionally detached because he remained calm beneath insult. They had mistaken restraint for emptiness. Now the restraint was breaking, and powerful men rarely fractured safely. A knock interrupted the silence. Lucien's expression cooled instantly. Enter. Mr. Mercer stepped inside carrying another stack of correspondence sealed with dark wax. The Ravenshire estate steward looked increasingly uneasy these days, as though even years of service had failed to prepare him for the Duke's current mood. Your Grace. He placed the letters carefully upon the desk. Additional reports from London. Lucien unfolded the first immediately while Mercer remained standing stiffly nearby. Seraphina noticed the steward avoiding her eyes. What happened? She asked quietly. Mercer hesitated. Lucien answered without looking up from the paper. Lord Penhast's daughter was removed from consideration for the Carlisle engagement this morning. Seraphina frowned slightly. Because of the rumors? Because Carlisle discovered Penhast financed them. Lucien folded the paper once. Families become remarkably principled when money begins disappearing. Mercer cleared his throat cautiously. There is also the matter regarding Lady Hollowmere. Lucien's attention sharpened instantly. Speak. 3 invitations were withdrawn from her this afternoon. Mercer shifted uneasily. And the Duchess of Farnham cancelled tomorrow's dinner gathering entirely after learning your Grace planned attendance. A dangerous stillness settled over Lucien's expression. Good. Seraphina looked toward him carefully. You planned that intentionally. Yes. Mercer wisely excused himself moments later, leaving silence behind once more. Lucien crossed toward the fireplace and finally removed his coat entirely before draping it across a nearby chair. The movement exposed how tired he truly looked. His shoulders remained tense even now, his posture rigid with constant vigilance. Seraphina watched him quietly for several moments before speaking again. You have not rested since the ball. Rest appears inefficient. You are becoming impossible. A faint shadow of humor touched his face briefly. That is hardly new. She moved toward him slowly. Lucien. His eyes softened immediately the moment she reached him. Every time, no matter how cold he became toward the rest of the world, that softness appeared for her without fail now. It frightened her sometimes, because devotion this deep carried its own form of danger. She touched his wrist gently. This cannot continue forever. What cannot? The retaliation. His gaze darkened slightly. You think I should stop? I think you are beginning to enjoy it. The words lingered heavily between them. Lucien looked away first, toward the fire, toward the snow beyond the windows, anywhere except directly at her. Perhaps, he admitted quietly. Seraphina's chest tightened. Lucien. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Do you know what I saw when Victoria spoke to you at the ball? His voice lowered further. I saw every moment London ever made you feel small. Silence filled the library. And for 1 second, he continued softly, I wanted them afraid enough to understand what they had done to you. Seraphina felt emotion catch unexpectedly beneath her ribs. Lucien turned back toward her then. Candlelight flickered across his face while exhaustion and fury warred quietly behind his eyes. That is the problem, he murmured. I do not know where protecting you ends anymore. She stepped closer immediately. Here. His expression shifted faintly. What? Seraphina placed her hand against the center of his chest. His heartbeat struck hard beneath her palm. It ends here. With us. Pain flickered through his features before disappearing beneath restraint again. You still believe this can remain civilized. And you do not? Lucien looked down at her hand resting over his heart. Then toward the windows where winter darkness had already begun creeping slowly across the estate despite the early hour. Westmore sent another letter this morning. Her pulse tightened slightly. What did it say? Lucien's jaw hardened. That men who lose power become unpredictable. Silence followed. Then quietly he added, I believe that was intended as a threat. Seraphina felt unease spread slowly through her chest. Against you. Against anyone standing beside me. The fire cracked softly behind them. Lucien reached up and covered her hand against his chest with his own. Warm. Protective. Possessive enough now to feel instinctive. I spent years making certain no one could wound me personally. he said quietly. Then you arrived. The raw honesty in the confession stole her breath. Lucien lowered his forehead briefly against hers. And now every enemy I possess suddenly knows exactly where my heart lives. Outside the library windows, the last pale light faded across the snow-covered grounds of Ravenshire Manor, while somewhere far beyond the estate walls, London society began realizing something else entirely. The Duke of Ravenshire was not merely retaliating anymore. He was preparing for war. Snow began falling again shortly after midnight. Thick, relentless. By dawn the roads surrounding Ravenshire Manor had nearly vanished beneath white drifts, while brutal winter winds rattled the tall windows hard enough to shake candle flames inside their brass holders. Seraphina stood near the bedroom fireplace, wrapped in deep blue velvet, watching the storm consume the estate beyond the glass. The world looked quieter beneath snow, softer. That illusion no longer comforted her. Behind her, Lucien fastened the dark buttons of his winter coat with sharp, controlled movements, while two loaded pistols rested untouched upon the nearby table beside stacks of correspondence sealed in black wax. He had been preparing to leave since before sunrise. "You should not travel in this weather," Seraphina said quietly without turning from the windows. "Westmore requested emergency parliamentary assembly." Lucien adjusted one leather glove slowly. "That alone makes attendance necessary." "It is a trap." "Yes." She turned then. "And you are still going." His gaze settled immediately upon her, softer now than it became with anyone else in the world. "If I remain absent, he controls the narrative." "Lucien." She crossed toward him slowly. "You have not slept properly in days." "Neither have you." "That is different." No, his hand lifted automatically toward her waist the moment she reached him. "It is not." Candlelight flickered softly across the room, while snow hammered against the windows beyond them. Seraphina studied the exhaustion tightening invisibly through his features. He looked sharper lately, harder. Every attack against their child had carved away another layer of restraint from the man London once believed emotionally untouchable. "You are frightening people," she said softly. "Good." "Lucien." His jaw tightened slightly. "You think I enjoy becoming this man, do you?" Silence followed briefly. Then quietly he admitted, "More than I should." The honesty of it tightened something painfully inside her chest. Before she could answer, another knock sounded sharply against the chamber doors. Lucien's entire posture shifted instantly. Cold, alert, dangerous. "Enter." Mr. Mercer stepped inside, pale enough to alarm Seraphina immediately. Snow dusted the shoulders of his coat as though he had come directly from the outer grounds. "Your Grace." Lucien's expression darkened. "What happened?" Mercer struggled briefly for composure. The West carriage team reported unusual activity near the South Road shortly before dawn. Silence tightened through the room. "Explain clearly," Lucien said quietly. Two riders attempted intercepting one of the supply wagons entering the estate. Mercer swallowed hard. The coachman escaped before confrontation. Seraphina felt cold move slowly through her stomach. Lucien remained perfectly still. Descriptions. Faces concealed. Heavy winter cloaks. Mercer hesitated briefly, but one of the guards recognized the crest stamped into a saddle buckle. "Whose?" "Westmore Shipping insignia." The room went silent except for the storm outside. Lucien's eyes lowered slightly. Not surprise. Calculation. "Leave us," he said softly. Mercer obeyed immediately. The moment the doors shut, Seraphina crossed toward Lucien fully. "You cannot still go to London." "I must." "Lucien." "If Westmore is desperate enough to threaten Ravenshire property openly," then something changed. His voice sharpened. "I intend to discover what." Seraphina stared at him in disbelief. "Someone just attempted to intercept your estate roads. And now they expect fear." He reached for the heavy black coat draped across the chair. "I will not reward that expectation." Frustration flashed suddenly through her chest. "Must everything become war with you?" Lucien froze briefly. Then slowly he turned back toward her. "You think I wanted this?" His voice lowered dangerously. You think I enjoy watching guards patrol outside your bedroom because half of London cannot tolerate the existence of our child? The raw fury beneath his restraint struck the room hard enough to silence her instantly. Lucien looked away at once afterward as though ashamed of losing control even briefly. I am sorry, he said quietly. No, Seraphina stepped closer. Do not apologize for being afraid. Something flickered across his expression then. Brief, devastating, fear, real fear, the kind powerful men rarely allowed anyone to witness. You still do not understand, he murmured. If anything happens to you... His voice failed abruptly. Seraphina felt her breath catch. Lucien closed his eyes once before continuing more roughly. I do not know what remains of me afterward. The confession settled between them like breaking glass. Before she could answer, another sound shattered the fragile silence. Wheels. Fast. Too fast. Both of them turned instantly toward the windows overlooking the front grounds. A carriage burst through the snowstorm toward Ravenshire Manor with reckless speed, while guards on horseback rode hard behind it shouting through the wind. Lucien crossed toward the windows immediately. What now? Seraphina whispered. The carriage skidded violently across the snow-covered drive below before stopping near the front entrance. One of the Ravenshire guards leaped down first while another figure stumbled from the carriage wrapped heavily in dark wool and snow. That is Harris, Lucien said sharply. West carriage captain. Then the front entrance doors below burst open. Even from the second-floor windows they could hear shouting echoing through the grand entrance hall. Lucien was already moving toward the chamber doors. Stay here. Lucien. He stopped only long enough to look back once. Lock the doors behind me. Then he disappeared into the corridor with terrifying speed. Seraphina followed despite his order. By the time she reached the upper gallery overlooking the entrance hall below, half the household staff had already gathered near the staircase while snow and freezing wind swept violently through the open front doors. Harris stood near the center of the marble floor, barely able to remain upright. Blood darkened one sleeve of his coat, though the injury itself appeared shallow. Lucien stood before him rigid with dangerous stillness. Say it again, the Duke said quietly. Harris struggled for breath. The south bridge collapsed behind us, Your Grace. Collapsed. No accident. The coachman looked visibly shaken. Someone removed the support chains during the storm. Cold spread through Seraphina's chest. Where were you traveling? Lucien demanded. London route inspection. Harris swallowed hard. But they knew the path beforehand. Silence crashed through the enormous entrance hall. Snow swirled inward through the open doors while servants stared in pale horror. Lucien's expression became terrifyingly blank. How many riders? 3. Did they follow you? No, Your Grace. They vanished after the bridge gave way. Seraphina gripped the gallery railing tightly. This was no longer rumor, no longer humiliation. Someone had begun targeting Ravenshire directly. Lucien seemed to realize the same thing because something inside him changed visibly then. The final restraint broke. Slowly he looked upward toward the second-floor gallery where Seraphina stood frozen above the entrance hall. The moment he saw her there, fear flashed violently across his face before fury consumed it entirely. Go back upstairs, he ordered sharply. Seraphina did not move. Lucien. Now. The command cracked through the hall hard enough to startle even the servants below. Yet beneath the anger she heard something far worse. Panic. Real panic. She descended the staircase slowly anyway. You cannot keep me hidden forever. Watch me try. His voice sounded rough now, fractured at the edges. Seraphina reached the final stair and stopped directly before him. Snow melted across the marble floors around them while wind howled outside like something alive. They are escalating because you are retaliating, she whispered. And if I stop? Lucien stepped closer suddenly. Do you believe men willing to threaten my pregnant wife become merciful afterward? Silence followed. No answer existed. Harris lowered his eyes instinctively as tension sharpened between them. Lucien turned away abruptly and dragged one hand through his dark hair with visible exhaustion. Then, unexpectedly, his control shattered completely. I cannot lose you. The words escaped him raw enough to silence the entire hall. Seraphina's breath caught sharply. Lucien looked horrified by his own honesty. Yet he continued anyway because fear had finally become stronger than pride. Do you understand? His voice roughened further. You are not merely my wife anymore. His eyes lifted toward her again. Gray. Haunted. Devoted beyond reason now. You are my heart walking outside my body. The storm outside seemed to disappear entirely for one impossible moment. Seraphina stared at him while emotion rose painfully into her throat. Lucien crossed the final distance between them and pulled her carefully against him despite the watching servants surrounding the hall. One hand cradled the back of her head, while the other settled protectively across the small curve of her stomach beneath the velvet gown. The gesture looked instinctive now. Permanent. I would burn every title in England before I let them touch you, he whispered against her hair. Then suddenly Seraphina felt it. Sharp, sudden, low across her abdomen. Pain. Her breath caught involuntarily. Lucien felt the shift instantly. His entire body went rigid. Seraphina. Another wave hit stronger this time. Not overwhelming, but wrong. Too early. Too sharp. She gripped his coat instinctively. Lucien's face drained of all color. Get Dr. Pembroke, he said quietly. Nobody moved fast enough. Now! The command thundered through Ravenshire Manor while snow raged outside and fear finally entered the eyes of the Duke of Ravenshire for real. Dr. Pembroke arrived through the blizzard less than an hour later with snow frozen into the folds of his heavy wool coat and visible alarm already etched across his face before he even crossed the threshold of Ravenshire Manor. The moment he entered the upstairs corridor outside the Duchess's chambers, Lucien intercepted him personally. Candlelight flickered against dark paneled walls while servants rushed quietly through the hall carrying steaming water, linens, and fresh lamps beneath the crushing weight of tension filling the estate. Tell me exactly what happened, the physician demanded while removing his gloves quickly. Lucien's expression looked carved from winter itself. Sharp abdominal pain. Sudden onset. Bleeding. No fever. No, Dr. Pembroke nodded once and moved toward the bedroom doors immediately. Then he paused. Your Grace. Lucien's eyes lifted sharply. You must remain calm. A terrible silence followed, because both men understood the problem instantly. The Duke of Ravenshire had not been calm for weeks. He had been surviving on fury and fear sharpened into discipline. And now the woman carrying his child was in pain because someone had finally pushed him beyond control entirely. Lucien stepped aside without another word. Inside the bedchamber, the atmosphere glowed warm beneath dozens of candles despite the storm raging beyond the windows. Snow hammered endlessly against the glass while the fire roared high enough to chase winter from the room itself. Seraphina rested against the pillows, breathing carefully through another wave of discomfort, while Clara adjusted blankets near the foot of the bed with trembling hands. The moment Lucien entered behind the physician, Seraphina looked toward him immediately. Not Dr. Pembroke. Him. That alone nearly destroyed what remained of his restraint. He crossed the room at once. I am here. Her fingers found his instantly. Cold. Slightly shaking now despite all her efforts to remain composed. Dr. Pembroke moved toward the bedside. Your Grace, I must examine the Duchess. Lucien did not release her hand. The physician wisely chose not to mention it. Several long minutes followed while wind screamed through the storm outside and tension thickened unbearably inside the chamber. Lucien remained seated beside the bed without moving except to tighten his grip each time pain crossed Seraphina's face. He looked terrifyingly still. Not calm. A man holding himself together through force alone. Finally, Dr. Pembroke stepped back slowly. Silence swallowed the room immediately. Well? Lucien asked quietly. The physician exhaled carefully. The child still appears stable. Lucien closed his eyes once. Briefly. Relief struck visibly through him hard enough to weaken the rigid line of his shoulders for one impossible second. However, Dr. Pembroke continued cautiously. The Duchess must avoid further stress immediately. His gaze sharpened meaningfully toward Lucien. No travel. No public gatherings. No emotional distress. A humorless laugh nearly escaped Lucien then. You ask for miracles. I ask for survival. The physician's tone hardened unexpectedly. Your Grace. Her body cannot endure prolonged fear without consequence. Silence crashed heavily through the room afterward. Seraphina watched Lucien carefully. He looked away first. Dr. Pembroke gathered several folded cloths from the nearby table. I will prepare calming tinctures and remain at Ravenshire Manor through the storm. He glanced once toward the windows rattling beneath violent wind. No one is leaving this estate tonight regardless. Moments later the physician and servants withdrew quietly, leaving only candlelight, storm winds, and the terrible intimacy of fear behind. Lucien remained seated beside the bed without speaking. Seraphina studied him silently for several seconds before finally whispering, Lucien. He lifted his eyes immediately, gray, exhausted, haunted now. Do not look at me like that. Like what? As though I am slipping away. Pain crossed his face openly then. You nearly did. Her chest tightened softly. Lucien lowered his head briefly while still holding her hand against the blankets. I should have ended this weeks ago. Ended what? Everything. His voice roughened. Westmore, Hollowmere, the rumors, the attacks. Candlelight trembled faintly across his expression. I kept believing I could control escalation. Lucien. He looked toward her again with devastating honesty. I was wrong. Silence filled the room while snow buried the world outside deeper beneath white darkness. Seraphina reached carefully toward his face. Her fingers brushed the tension near his jaw softly enough to stop his breathing for half a heartbeat. This is not your fault. Everything threatening you became my fault the moment I failed to protect you properly. You cannot fight every enemy in England. Watch me. The answer came instantly again. Yet this time exhaustion broke through the fury underneath it. Seraphina saw it clearly now. Lucien was unraveling quietly beneath the weight of loving people he could not fully shield. She shifted slightly against the pillows despite his immediate concern. Lucien, do not move. I am fine. You frightened me. The raw honesty in the words silenced her briefly. Lucien leaned forward suddenly and pressed his forehead carefully against the back of her hand, still resting within his grasp. The gesture looked painfully intimate beneath the candlelight. Vulnerable in ways the Duke of Ravenshire never allowed himself to appear before anyone else alive. I spent years convincing myself attachment was weakness, he whispered quietly. Then you smiled at me once across a ballroom and ruined my entire life. A soft breath escaped her somewhere between laughter and tears. Lucien closed his eyes briefly. I cannot survive losing you. Before she could answer, another sharp pain tightened low across her abdomen. Stronger this time. Seraphina inhaled sharply despite herself. Lucien's head lifted instantly. Seraphina. She tried to steady her breathing. It is all right. No fear entered his voice immediately. No, it is not. He stood so quickly the chair beside the bed scraped sharply against the floorboards. Pembroke. The physician returned moments later carrying fresh linens and another servant behind him with steaming water. Tension exploded through the chamber instantly afterward. Hours blurred together beneath storm winds and candlelight. The pain worsened gradually despite every effort to stop it. Dr. Pembroke's expression grew tighter with each passing hour, while servants moved through the chamber in nervous silence carrying towels, fresh water, and whispered prayers beneath their breath. Outside, the blizzard consumed Ravenshire Manor completely. No carriage could leave. No physician beyond Pembroke could arrive through the storm. Lucien never left Seraphina's side once. Not once. He stood beside the bed through every painful hour with one hand wrapped tightly around hers while exhaustion hollowed shadows deeper beneath his eyes. Sometimes he whispered quietly to her between contractions. Sometimes he simply watched her with helpless terror, hidden badly beneath restraint. Near midnight, another wave of pain struck hard enough to force a broken sound from Seraphina before she could hide it. Lucien visibly shattered at the sound. Do something, he demanded sharply toward Dr. Pembroke. I am doing everything possible. Then do more. Lucien. Seraphina's voice barely rose above a whisper. He turned back immediately. She reached weakly toward him. Come here. He obeyed without hesitation. She touched his face gently despite trembling fingers. You are frightening everyone. Good. But his voice cracked slightly around the word now. Seraphina looked at him carefully beneath the golden candlelight. The feared Duke of Ravenshire looked utterly devastated. Hair disordered. Coat discarded hours ago. Sleeves rolled carelessly upward. Gray eyes filled with terror he no longer possessed strength to conceal. Listen to me, she whispered softly. I need you calm. Lucien swallowed hard. I am trying. That nearly undid her more than the pain itself. Suddenly Dr. Pembroke stepped forward quickly. Your Grace. Lucien looked up instantly. What? The physician's expression shifted. Not fear this time. Shock. Then slowly relief. The child is coming. Everything changed afterward. The chamber erupted into controlled chaos beneath flickering candlelight and storm winds battering the windows, while servants hurried through the room carrying blankets, heated water, and fresh linens. Lucien never released Seraphina's hand once through any of it. Not once. Hours later, just before dawn finally began softening the edges of the storm outside, a newborn cry pierced through Ravenshire Manor for the first time. Silence followed immediately afterward. Strange, breathless, sacred. Lucien froze beside the bed, completely motionless. Dr. Pembroke wrapped the infant carefully before turning toward them with visible astonishment still lingering across his features. Your Grace, the physician said softly. A son. Lucien stared at the child as though language itself had abandoned him. Then slowly Dr. Pembroke placed the infant into Seraphina's arms beneath the warm candlelight. The baby's tiny hand curled instinctively against the velvet blanket, while dark hair already visible beneath the soft fabric caught the flickering gold light. Lucien stepped closer. One step, then another. Seraphina looked up at him quietly. He has your eyes. Lucien finally looked down fully at his son. At the unmistakable Ravenshire features already visible despite the child being only moments old. Silence consumed him entirely. Then suddenly Seraphina saw it. Moisture gathering in the eyes of the man London once called cold beyond human feeling. Lucien lowered himself slowly beside the bed while staring at the child as though the entire world had shifted beneath his feet. His voice failed once before finally emerging rough with emotion. He is real. The vulnerability inside those 3 words shattered something fragile inside her chest. Lucien reached out carefully toward the infant with hands that had never trembled during political war, public scandal, or threats from powerful enemies. Yet now his fingers shook visibly. May I? Seraphina nodded softly. Lucien took his son into his arms with terrifying gentleness. Then finally the Duke of Ravenshire broke completely. One tear escaped before he could stop it. Then another. He bowed his head over the child while candlelight flickered around him and storm winds faded slowly beyond the windows of Ravenshire Manor. Mine, he whispered brokenly. You are both mine. Spring arrived late across London that year. Snow lingered stubbornly along shaded streets long after winter should have surrendered. And yet by the first week of April the city had transformed once more into silk, chandeliers, polished carriages, and aristocratic smiles sharp enough to wound. Ashbourne Palace glittered beneath thousands of candles during the Royal Spring Assembly, while noble families filled the enormous ballroom dressed in pale satin, military dress coats, diamonds, and carefully repaired reputations. Music drifted through the palace beneath painted ceilings while servants moved elegantly between guests carrying silver trays overflowing with crystal glasses and fresh roses imported from France. Yet despite the splendor surrounding them, an uneasy tension lingered beneath every conversation tonight. Because for the first time since the winter scandal, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire had returned publicly to society. You are staring at the doors, Winifred murmured softly beside Lady Penhist near the ballroom staircase. So is everyone else, Lady Penhist replied before catching herself too late. The Dowager Duchess smiled faintly. At least honesty survives somewhere in London. Across the ballroom, Lord Edwin Westmore stood near a marble column speaking quietly with two ministers who looked increasingly uncomfortable beneath his presence. 3 months earlier, Westmore had controlled enough political alliances to influence half the House of Lords. Now rumors of collapsing investments, severed business ties, and private investigations followed him through every drawing room in England. Nearby, Lady Victoria Hollowmere remained surrounded by admirers out of habit rather than genuine affection. Society still welcomed beautiful women. It simply trusted them less after public failures. Victoria lifted her champagne glass slowly while pretending indifference toward the ballroom entrance. Her fingers tightened slightly anyway. Then the herald near the grand staircase struck his staff against marble floors hard enough to silence the room. His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshire. Her Grace, the Duchess of Ravenshire. The ballroom changed instantly. Conversation vanished. Music softened. Even breathing seemed quieter beneath the towering chandeliers as every aristocratic gaze turned toward the staircase. Lucien appeared first. Black formal evening attire sharpened the severe elegance of his tall frame, while silver candlelight caught faintly near his temples. He descended the staircase slowly with one gloved hand resting protectively at the small of Seraphina's back. Not possessive for show. Protective by instinct now. Always by instinct now. Seraphina moved beside him beneath the sea of candlelight wearing deep ivory silk embroidered with silver thread that shimmered softly each time she stepped across the marble stairs. Yet it was not the gown that silenced London tonight. It was the child in her arms. Wrapped carefully in pale silver blankets trimmed with Ravenshire black, the infant slept peacefully against her chest, entirely unaware that his existence had nearly started a political war before he ever opened his eyes. Lucien's son. The future Duke of Ravenshire. And unmistakably so. Even from across the ballroom, the resemblance could not be denied. Dark hair, gray eyes, the sharp line of the Ravenshire jaw already visible despite infancy. Silence spread outward through Ashbourne Palace like a living thing. Seraphina felt every stare settle upon them, while Lucien guided her carefully down the final staircase step. Yet tonight the humiliation felt different. Because nobody looked at her with pity anymore. They looked at her with realization. The Duke of Ravenshire had not merely chosen his wife. He had built his entire world around her. God help us! Someone whispered faintly near the orchestra balcony. The child looks exactly like him. Winifred smiled into her champagne glass. That must be terribly inconvenient for half of Parliament. Lucien crossed the ballroom beside Seraphina with calm authority, while aristocrats moved aside automatically in their path. No whispers followed now. No mocking glances. Only careful silence sharpened by memory. People remembered the winter ball. They remembered what happened to families who questioned the Ravenshire heir publicly. Fear remained an excellent teacher among the aristocracy. Victoria Hollowmere watched them approach from across the ballroom with perfect stillness frozen into every elegant line of her body. Seraphina met her gaze calmly. Victoria looked away first. That alone nearly stunned the surrounding nobles more than the child himself. Lucien noticed too. Of course he did. Remarkable, he murmured quietly beside Seraphina. London finally discovered self-preservation. A soft breath escaped somewhere between amusement and disbelief. Lucien's hand tightened slightly against her back at the sound. They stopped near the center of the ballroom beneath the largest chandelier while nobles gathered cautiously around them. Congratulations followed. Curtsies. Respectful bows. Smiles sharpened carefully into politeness now that the political tide had shifted completely. Lord Penhest bowed stiffly. Your Grace. The child is magnificent. Lucien regarded him coolly. You should remember that sentence the next time your wife mistakes gossip for conversation. Penhest visibly paled. Of course, Your Grace. Nearby, Lady Penhest nearly stopped breathing altogether. Seraphina almost pitied her. Almost. Then another figure approached slowly through the crowd. Victoria Hollowmere. Candlelight flashed against the silver embroidery of her gown, while the ballroom subtly quieted once more in anticipation. Victoria stopped several feet before them and lowered into a graceful curtsy toward Seraphina. "Your Grace." Seraphina held her gaze evenly. "Lady Hollowmere." Victoria's eyes moved briefly toward the child sleeping peacefully against the silver blankets. For the first time since Seraphina met her, uncertainty touched the beautiful woman's composure openly. "He resembles his father remarkably." Lucien's expression remained perfectly unreadable. "You sound disappointed." A faint flush rose beneath Victoria's carefully controlled smile. "Not disappointed. Corrected." Silence lingered briefly afterward. Then, unexpectedly, Victoria looked toward Seraphina fully. "I owe you an apology." Nearby aristocrats froze visibly. Public apologies among the nobility were rarer than mercy. Seraphina remained calm despite the shock rippling quietly through the ballroom around them. Victoria continued carefully. "I mistook your silence for fragility." Her eyes flickered once toward Lucien. "That was unwise." Lucien said nothing. Somehow that frightened Victoria more than anger ever could have. Seraphina studied the woman for several long seconds before finally answering softly. "Yes, it was." Victoria accepted the response with remarkable grace considering the audience surrounding them. Then she lowered her head once more and retreated into the crowd beneath hundreds of astonished stares. "You enjoyed that?" Lucien murmured quietly. Seraphina glanced up at him. "A little." The corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. Music swelled again gradually across the ballroom as society finally exhaled after months of tension, scandal, fear, and speculation. Yet something fundamental had shifted permanently tonight. The Duchess of Ravenshire no longer stood alone in shadowed corners while London whispered around her. She stood at the center of the ballroom with the most powerful duke in England beside her and his heir sleeping safely in her arms. Lucien lowered his gaze toward his son for one brief moment before looking back toward the glittering ballroom surrounding them. "They are staring again," Seraphina whispered softly. "Let them." His voice deepened quietly. "I want London to remember exactly who belongs to Ravenshire." Warmth spread slowly through her chest while candlelight danced across marble floors and crystal chandeliers above them. Around the ballroom, noble families continued watching the Duke of Ravenshire carefully, still cautiously, still slightly afraid. But now something else existed beneath that fear. Understanding. Because after all the rumors, all the humiliation, and all the whispered cruelty, London had finally learned the truth hidden beneath Lucien Ravenshire's cold reputation. The most dangerous thing about the Duke of Ravenshire had never been his power. It was the depth of his devotion once someone finally became worthy of it. Lucien's fingers brushed lightly against Seraphina's gloved hand before intertwining with hers completely beneath the candlelight. "Are you tired?" he asked quietly. "No," she looked toward him softly. "Are you?" His gaze rested upon her for one lingering moment while the ballroom blurred quietly into gold and music around them. "Not anymore." Then the orchestra began another waltz beneath the towering chandeliers of Ashbourne Palace, while the future of House Ravenshire slept peacefully in his mother's arms, and all of London watched the feared Duke of Ravenshire look at his wife like she owned his soul.